Hey, what's going on everyone? Mekkah here, welcome back to the Fire Emblem big tier list, biggest tier list ever in fact. We are tiering every single Fire Emblem character based on their usefulness in the game, so we're rating them as units. And to figure out who to tier first, I ask my Patreons every month or so to suggest characters to put on there. So if you want to suggest characters, then you can join my Patreon if you want to, but please only join if you can afford it. I don't want your money if you need that money to pay your bills or anything. So this time we got around 30 characters to tier. Not a small amount, but we're going to see if we can get through them. And then I have another 30 lined up for part 4 that have also been suggested this month. So I've got my work cut out for me, but don't worry, this is really fucking fun to do. So let's get into it. I've got characters from FE3 up to FE8 today. And then next time we're going to do characters from FE9 up to FE16, so 3 houses. So if you like those games, then look forward to the next part. If you like these games, you're in the right place. Because we're going to start with FE3 Draug. Draug was suggested by Giant Corkscrew, thank you very much. And it's the first FE3 character on here. And I don't have separate sprites for Book 2 and Book 1, so I'm just going to talk about him briefly and then kind of average them out to figure out where to place him. FE1 Draug was like, he had a big problem where he couldn't promote. At the very least, they let him promote in FE3, but the troubles are not over there. He's still an armored unit, and not just that, but he's also an armored unit in a game where movement is pretty valuable. There is dismounting in that game, so he doesn't get outpaced by cavaliers all the time, but there's still a lot of maps where he just can't get anywhere. Case in point, Book 2, Chapter 1, right away, Draug just cannot access the latter part of the map, and that's freaking horrible. Or take Chapter 2, there's a bunch of forests, and there's nowhere where you can go. He has like 1 or 2 moves through the forest. It's pretty awful. Chapter 3, pretty much the entire map is just walking all the way around to get someplace. And Draug just falls behind really quickly because of that, and that sucks for him. It helps that he can promote, I guess, but other than that, there's not a whole lot he can do. I like him a lot better in Shadow Dragon and New Mystery, where you can reclass him, and then he actually turns into a surprisingly frail and strong unit that can double stuff, because his base defense is actually kind of low. But in FE3, it's just like, there's not much of a point to using him. The big problem with highly durable units with no mobility in a game like FE3 is a lot of other units have no trouble surviving enemies and taking them on. So a unit like Draug doesn't really add a whole lot of things you don't already have. It's not that hard to tank enemies in that game with like Pala or Katria or even Marth. They can take hits just fine in FE3 because the enemies are just so weak and just don't skill very well. Especially in Book 1, but even in Book 2 this is a bit of a problem. And there's also a lot of mages around. FE3 Book 2 is pretty diverse when it comes to you know, enemy types. It's not just lances anymore like in FE3. There's a lot of mages sprinkled about. So he's a lot of trouble. So overall, I would say Draug is probably, like, if I had no F tier, if I just had up to E tier, then I think he would go into D tier. But because I think he's pretty bad, I'm actually going to put him below Callion. I actually think he's less viable than Callion overall, which is unfortunate for our friend here, but it is the way it is, I'm afraid. Hold up, my white was showing here. There we go. So yeah, I don't think Draug is very good, unfortunately. Once again, though, just because I say a unit isn't good doesn't mean they're not usable or fun to use or anything. It's fun to tank stuff, but, you know, some units are on the lower end of the scale, so we gotta put him here. But I think Giant Corkscrew knows, so thanks anyway for submitting this guy. I like having an FE3 character on the list. It makes my whole thing look very diverse, very diverse. It's also, like, getting really big. I have to scroll every time I need to reach the top or the bottom. Then we have Nana. She was submitted for both FE4 and FE5 by the same person, P. Vladia, so thank you very much for that. I like Nana in both games. I think FE5 stands out a little bit more, but the FE4 one is still pretty good. Just being Lacus's kid means you have A-rank swords, just because the Hazel Blood gets it up to A-rank. But even if she didn't have Hazel Blood, she'd still have Beast Swords, I believe. Yeah, Troubadours have Beast Swords, so she can use a Brave Sword, and that automatically means that if you can buy the Brave Sword, you can beat the arena. I'm very close to beating an FE4 Iron Man as I'm recording this. I think I've probably either lost or beaten it by the time this goes up, because the finale is tomorrow, which I think this will be uploaded on Monday. So I expect Nana will be able to survive that. She has been okay. I had some trouble getting her through the arena because I neglected to give her the Brave Sword when she needed it, and I figured there wasn't much of a need to promote her quickly because she doesn't really do combat very much. She's okay at combat, but not great. It doesn't help that in that Iron Man I paired Azel with Lacus's, so her strength was a bit more lacking than usual. I really hate that pairing, and I want to rant about it in depth so much, but I feel like I've already done it on stream a lot of the time, so I'm going to spare you that quick rant right here. I think her best stat is definitely Beowulf, and if Beowulf is somehow not available, maybe because you killed him, or because, I don't know, he died on the way, or because you just want to do something different, then I'd suggest, well, if you just go with, like, Alec or something as a dad, then you get the same thing, but a little worse. You get Nihil instead of a cost, which is worse, because there's not much of a use for Nihil in a game. Almost no enemies have skills worth negating, and Nihil doesn't even negate that many skills to begin with, just critical hits, and, like, Horse Slayer effectiveness, and, like, Astra and Luna, like, no enemies have those, so it's not very relevant. But something like that is her second best pairing. If you're looking for something like different and fun, then I guess you could try Azel. I've never found the extra magic for her healing to be relevant. I feel like with Mend, she heals enough. She can't use Recover, but with Mend, you generally let someone take like another 1 or 2 hits, and that's generally enough. That's generally all you need, along with like Physic if you need it, or like Julia with a Mend or something. So I don't think that's too relevant, and the higher strength I think helps her beat stuff up when she needs to. Usually she inherits the Earth Sword. What I really like doing with FE4 Nana, if I want to get Finn and Leaf and herself out of there, is I have her inherit the Return Staff and the Return Band and just teleport them all home right away. And just give up Leinster Castle. You don't need it. It doesn't get destroyed. It just gets turned green instead of red. And then you can later seize it. And I think that gets you some extra gold. And in addition, I mean, I guess one thing you could do first is like save some villages, kill the brigands before they ruin all the villages. That could be nice. You could train Leaf on the Ulster troops, but I think he's generally more effective if you can just let him get the Paragon Band first and then kill some Dark Mages maybe. But it really depends on how you go about it. So I would say Nana is pretty good, not essential, but pretty nice for returning people home and then warping them elsewhere in case the chapter demands that. She is the only mounted return staff user you have for a while until people like Leaf and Fee promote. So that is a nice niche for her. So just from feeling what I'm getting, it's like useful but not like broken or anything. So I'm thinking like B tier is something viable for her. So I think she's better than these so far. This is where I'm getting a little unsure. I would say she's better than Cecilia. Kind of like this, kind of a similar utility to Cecilia, but her like stats are better overall. I'll put her like around here somewhere. I think she's alright, but I think Hawkeye's definitely better. I'm not sure about Soren. I do like her better because, I mean, both of these are pretty mount-heavy games, so I think it's fair to favor Nana over Soren. I think that's roughly where I put her. It's also like funny how much her portrait looks like Lacus. This is kind of creepy. I actually like the difference in FE5 better. Or rather, I like how she looks in FE5 more. But yeah, there we go. Nana over Soren. Then we have Midir. Same game. All this is FE4. There's a lot of FE4 and FE5 in this one. Midir is in Generation 1. And I've always found him pretty useful. I think a lot of people used to give him crap for being worse than Jamka at fighting, but that was because they would give Jamka the killer bow that he comes with, and not to Midir, even though Midir makes better use of it. He has to afford it, he has to buy it, but he can afford it in like Chapter 2 definitely, which is the first time you want to sell it anyway. As long as he's been clearing some arenas, maybe get like 1 village or so. That is affordable though, and once he's the killer bow, he's pretty good at like killing stuff. The crit from the killer bow isn't that relevant. Midir has pretty low base skill, I think it's like 8 or something. It's like single digit level crit, maybe goes up to double digits, but that's about it. So that's not too relevant, but between that crit chance and then pursuit and a cost, he can definitely get some damage done. And even if he doesn't kill something in 1 round, he can set up the kill for someone else. The hit and runs are pretty nice in general. Usually I have him move full move or almost full move, so the hiding part I think is a little overrated in that like he doesn't instantly go back to safety just because he has Kanto. That only works if the enemy is already close to you. Those situations do happen most of the time. I just like having high move on my bow user so he can keep up with Sigurd and Quan and the whole squad, whereas Jamka kind of stays behind. But even compared to the rest of the cast, I think Midir is pretty decent. I think there's definitely situations where he's more useful than like, say, Alec and Noish, 2 other mounted units. Just because Midir doesn't have to enemy phase to be useful. You can kill stuff with Midir on player phase, then move him out of the way, and let Sigurd like wrap up stuff from there. Whereas Alec and Noish, they're kind of like part of their utility is having enemy phases. So I like Midir a lot better in that regard. His stats leave something to be desired, but just his class alone is good enough, I think. Lack of an enemy phase does hurt a little bit in FE4, so I have to penalize him a bit for that. But he's been getting a fair rating these days. I feel like people realize nowadays how good he is. I feel like it's better than these like low availability people, and I think it's more useful than Urk. This is kind of like a B tier unit is what I'm feeling right now. I would say he's better than, I think this is Shadow Dragon Ogma, as far as I remember, so I think he's better than that too. So I'm gonna put him like around here somewhere. Could be up a little higher, I could be convinced otherwise, but FE4 is like, it's pretty competitive in like how many good units there are. just in Gen 1 alone, you have like a Sigurd, Quan. It's kind of hard to think of like a lot of units that are like consistently better than him. But for example, I do think Lacus is significantly better once she promotes. Maybe not all the time, but for a significant amount. This is assuming 4 steady Arthur, kind of, I remember. So I do think Saleh is like significantly better. So this feels about right. Feels about right to me. Then we have Charlo. This is not Corporal, this is actually Charlo. Let's see, Midir was submitted by Inuzama Frost, by the way. I'm sorry for forgetting to mention that. I have a spreadsheet right here with everyone on there. So that's thanks to Inazuma Frost. There we go. And Charlo was submitted by Lilio. So thanks a lot. I remember your Sporkle things. Those were fun. Anyway, Charlo pretty nice overall at existing for a little bit. I'm having a lot of fun with 4 steady Corporal right now, but I can't imagine that I would use him without 4 steady because Jesus Christ, that's basically what Charlo is. The only thing that Charlo has as a substitute over Corporal, well, first of all, you get to kill Sylvia. That's always fun. Second is he has the Berserk Staff, which you get by talking to Hannibal at some point, or like ending his turn next to Hannibal's in Chapter 9. I think after you conquer one of the next castles. You don't get it right away, but you get it soon. And the Berserk Staff, it's very, very situational. It's one of the most situational staffs I've ever seen. There's like 1 or 2 things I would do with the Berserk Staff, I think. One of them being you Berserk Arion, because then you don't have to deal with Arion, which is always a huge plus. Berserk enemies in FE4, I feel like they're not as dangerous for enemies as others sometimes, but I think in the case of Arion, you can definitely have him kill a lot of his friends, and just not having to deal with him is great. You'll still want to kill him just to get the Miracle Ring, I feel like, and so eventually you're going to have to deal with his stats. I would almost rather sleep Arion than Berserk him. The other fun use, and again, this is kind of, whatever, you Berserk one of the Dreadlords, the one with Hell, and then you have that guy hit Julius, and hopefully get Julius to 1 HP, and then you can just kill him with like any weapon you want. You can use like a Javelin if you want to, like Falcom did in their ranked run, their ranked LTC, but you can really use anyone you want to kill him, so you don't have to bother with Nargon. It saves a bunch of turns, but that's about it. That's really all I could really use Berserk for. It's fun, but it's not really worth killing Sylvia over unless you like killing Sylvia a lot. I think generally you want Lean to inherit a Light Ring. I think that's better than having Layla with Charm. I think that gets you more utility. And other than that, like, Charlo's stats aren't like spectacular enough. He does have Paragon actually, which I almost forgot to mention, so he grows faster than most versions of Corporal, unless you pair Sylvia with Lex. Other than that, yeah, not a whole lot to him. Almost no availability. 5 move in a game where at that point most people have 9, or at least most viable units have 9, or at least 8, or at least 6. 5 is just bad. He can use Physics at least. He comes with a Physic at base, so you can spam those to get a bunch of levels. I think he gets like 70 XP from a single Physic, so that's kind of nice, but overall I think it's kind of a meme unit. I don't know if he's as bad as Oliver is. He has like similarities almost, so I think he's either E or F tier. I'm gonna put him like above Oliver, I think. He's not that great, but he's super fun to use. Like Lilio, if you want me to tier units higher, you're gonna have to submit better units, I'm afraid. Next is Rin's submission of Sigurd. Really nice simp each other on Patreon, mostly just to see each other's posts, but I was like, you know what, you can submit a unit if you want. So she went with Sigurd. It was either Sigurd or Deirdre, I think. Sigurd, of course, one of the best units in the franchise. There was a reason I put him at, I think, number 2 in the best units of all time thing, and it hasn't really changed my my opinion since. It's between like Sigurd and Seth, basically, that spot. And goddamn, Sigurd is so good. I like to just call him his own Jig, and basically, I'm definitely gonna put him in S tier. I'm just gonna figure out where real quick. He's definitely gonna go higher than this. I just wanted to scroll up, basically, check out all the other S tier units, because goddamn, he's so fucking good. There is just no one that comes close to how good Sigurd is. He's infinitely superior to everyone else for like every chapter of the game. The only one who comes like close is like Lewin with Forseti, and even he has no mounts, no pursuit, and some fragile defenses if they're being tested at all, although the avoid kind of helps. But Sigurd is just basically invincible. Really hard carry. One of the reasons FE4 Iron Man is so easy. The fact that he just has swords, horse, and pursuit. It's like the holy trinity of what makes you good in FE4. And then he has the stats to back it up. Like, he has enough speed to double. The threshold is only 1, so it's pretty easy to reach. Even with lances, even with heavy javelins, he can double. Enough strength to 2-hit KO, another very important aspect. And then access to like good weapons as well. One of the like 2 people early on that can use the Silver Sword, and there's no reason to give it to Ethelyn, as long as she can kill stuff with Sigurd. Just a fantastic unit overall. I wish he was more interesting than that. unit-wise, but it just kills everything. And the leadership is super nice. You almost always want to make sure that units attack near Sigurd, so they get plus 10 hit and avoid. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but when it does, you'll thank him on your knees for being there with his leadership. And the Canto mechanic in FE4 is absolutely busted. The fact that you can use road tiles to have like 12 move and just move ahead of everyone along with Quan, especially useful in chapter 2. I think I played FE4 Reverse Recruitment, and in that one your Lord is Tiltu because he's the last unit to join in Gen 1 normally. And I had to slog with her 6 move, at least she was a pre-promote, so 6 move as a War Mage through like a bunch of maps, and that was hell. Like Sigurd is so much better than that. Even in the Spirit Forest, one of those places that nerfs Sigurd's move to 3, he is still the most mobile unit you have because his move is just that good. Like he has the same move as Ira and Jamka, but he still has more than anyone else. It's insane. I think it's fair to put Sigurd at the absolute top for now. I don't think he's gonna stick for this whole video, but for now I'm definitely gonna stick him right here. I do think he's better than Har. Har does fly, but I think in the context of Radiant Dawn, especially with its limited availability for everyone, I think Sigurd sticks out a little bit more. And again, I do treat FE4 Gen 1 as one whole game, because there's almost no one available for all the game. I don't think it's fair to like cut his availability in half or treat it as cut in half just because he's not around for Gen 2, because that's not the norm in FE4. It's not the norm. And I kind of give Har the same benefit of the doubt, but I think in Har's case, he just still has like the best availability in the game. So, he's still number 2. He's not bad. He's not bad. But yeah, I think the way FE4 is constructed is a little different than FE10 in that way. But I don't think it changed his placement very much either way. On the next, we get some Thracian units, and Merida was submitted by Corey, so thank you very much. And Merida, we're gonna place probably somewhere around the middle. Merida saved my butt in my last FE5 Iron Man to an extent. I'm not sure if she saved my butt, but she saved me a heart attack basically, because FE5 has one enemy in the final chapter that has a lot of really scary skills. She's a combination of Miracle and Wrath, and then really high magic, so you can't disable her with like a sleep or a magic staff. And I know this seems like irrelevant, but I usually don't talk about final chapters as if they're like the all-determining factor. But this is just a personal experience I had with Merida, and having to like fight her in combat or like doing that at all is a risk, because if you miss due to Miracle, she's gonna counter crit with like 60 attack or something effectively because of the crit. So basically anyone who tries that has a chance to die. Unless you have Nihil, and Merida doesn't have Nihil in her base kit, but her personal sword, I think it's called like the Merida sword, or it's actually the Darkness sword, but it was converted to a Merida sword. It gives her Nihil, and other than like through a scroll or through using Trude, you can't really get Nihil very reliably, or you can't get it at all in FE5. So she's one of the few people who can do it. And then her stats at the end game are good enough to just 2-hit KO her with that sword, because that sword is brave, so she doesn't even get to counterattack, and that basically solves the problem. She's also very accurate at that point, so no real chance of missing. Miracle doesn't work, Wrath doesn't work, she doesn't get 1-hit KO'd, she's totally fine. Now, that is one very small blip on the radar of Merida's like utility. It is something that stands out to me because it's just, I usually don't really use Merida and don't really train her, but she was really good. She also got like +2 move level ups in that playthrough. This was super sick. Merida's bases leave something to be desired though. Her base strength is kind of low. I don't have as much of an issue with her low base strength because she does have the means to KO enemies anyway, thanks to her like broken ass personal sword and her hyper super critical. I think she's like 5, and then she has Luna as well for an extra chance to basically do extra damage. So her offense overall is fine despite the low offense, but despite the low base strength. But what really hurts her, I think, is how fragile she is. She has like around 24 base HP, I believe. Gets 2-shot by basically every enemy. Can get 1-shot if she gets crit through like a battle axe or something. That's very rarely, but can happen. But it could happen, it could happen. Basically any combination of enemies that's like reasonably competent, like the chapter 14 Armor Knights, is going to 2-hit KO her. And that can make her like a little bit hard to train sometimes. You definitely have to slow down and help her up there. Once she gets up there, she's pretty fine. I do think that FE5 enemies don't really warrant having a high stat machine like late game Merida around for most of the time. I think most of the time, like at base you want it to be stronger, and late game it's kind of overkill what she has. There's almost no spot where Merida is just good enough, so she's like lopsided in that way. And because FE5 enemies overall are very weak, I don't think it's very useful to have a high stat bot like her for most of the game. It's kind of overkill. So if I could, I would rather spread out her utility a little bit more evenly. You know what? I would rather have better bases and worse growths, basically, is what I'm saying. So, I also don't think she's that great of a boss killer, relatively to say Asbel, because she has to deal with the gate and throne defense. So she relies on having partner like Luna or even Astra if you have her talk to Shanam, which is a little tricky, but I did it in Iron Man, so it's not that hard. But having to rely on those proc skills to kill bosses is kind of annoying. I would much rather just be able to use magic and kill those bosses that way. So I think that utility is also a little bit overrated. So I think in the end I would rate Merida like a C tier unit. Or no, I don't think she's bad enough for D tier. I think she's definitely a C tier unit. Definitely one of the better ones though. I would say she's around Luke's level. Not sure if she's better or worse. I put her below Ford because I think Ford's utility as a cav is like reasonably good, and you don't really have to train him to make use of it. Whereas Merida, if you don't train her at all, she's not going to be very useful at base level. She was used in Donon's 0% growth run actually, to kill one of the I think she was mostly there to support Galz's actually, and she had to dodge like a couple of poison bows. It was kind of fun to watch. I just remembered that. That was kind of cute. But yeah, thanks to Corey for submitting Merida. And then we have the next Nana submitted by P. Vladias. I did say this FE5 Nana stands out a lot more to me. I recently found Don's reasons for rating Nana a little bit lower than I think I tiered Nana before. Oh, it's because I gave her like 5 stars in Don's playthrough. And in Mangs' playthrough, and Donna was like, you know what, maybe Nana is not that good, and I am open to having my mind changed on units, so let me just reevaluate what we know about Nana. Alright, so first of all, Nana is primarily a utility unit. I think her fighting is generally not super great, but there's ways to make it great. I'll get into that, but mostly what she's mostly useful for is her support. So charm skill gives 10 hit and avoid to everyone around her. Not crit and crit avoid, but she does give that to Leaf and Finn. So she basically gives them plus 20 instead, and then extra crit and crit avoid as well, which can be nice. And then the healing. Now the healing at first is a bit unreliable. She only has E rank stabs. I don't think in any given playthrough, I don't think she's going to get higher than D rank or C rank unless you get like really slowed down and really grind up her staff rank, which I don't recommend doing because it's boring. But generally she's not one of those units like Safi or Lenone that's going to get like an A rank in staffs. Nana is alright at healing people, but at first she's going to miss quite a few times because of her low base skill. I think she has like maybe 64 chance to hit at base. I think she has like 6 base skill. It goes up by 4 every time she levels up skill, but until then it's not going to be that great. And once she gets 10 skill though, she's not going to miss with staffs anymore, and that problem is solved. And since you have the auto scroll, I actually recommend giving that to her for a while, as well to Safi, to make sure that they heal when you need them to, because there's nothing worse than missing a heal and having one of your characters die because of it. But yeah, extra reliability and healing support, and then of course when she goes outdoors, she can mount and use Kanto, rescue people out of the way, take drop people, help people capture stuff. That stuff is always useful. Then you have the Earth Sword, which on player phase is mostly just a chip weapon. Just weaken something like an armor you want to capture or something and have someone else kill it. That is like the extent of her player phase offense. You can make her really good on enemy phase if you want to. Generally she's not that great at fighting. Her stats aren't that great, but the Earth Sword is like pretty high might. And what you can do is you give her Wrath, and Wrath in FE5 just lets you crit on enemy phase, period, or at least on the first hit. So generally almost every generic enemy is going to die to a Wrath crit from Nana. Maybe bosses won't, but most enemies will. And that's generally gonna solve like any problem. I usually have her kill like that whole swath of enemies in chapter 9, the one where you go and rescue the Scrub Squad that's being attacked by a bunch of Draco Knights. It's like a whole group of soldiers and archers you can kill in that map. And I usually have Nana wrap them up pretty quickly with the Wrath Earth Sword, because what's going to happen is the enemy hits her, or maybe doesn't hit her, doesn't matter, and she counters them with the crit from the Earth Sword, and the Earth Sword drains HP, it has a Nosferatu effect, and that gets her back up to full, and that way she just kills a bunch of enemies. So you put like 5 scrolls on her if you want to, get good growths, and she'll become a good unit, and after promotion, she doesn't even need that gimmick anymore to survive, and she can promote if you do that. She can also use the Paragon Sword if you want to. If you equip the Paragon Sword while healing, you get double XP, which is another nice trick you can do if you want. Kind of similar to Paragon Sword Lithis, getting double XP for stealing, but with healing instead. So all that said, where does leave Nana? Maybe 5 stars is high for her. I definitely don't think she is S tier. I don't think she belongs up here with people like Dimitri and Asbel and Sigurd. So I'm still feeling A tier though. I feel like Nana is one of the best units to deploy in almost any given map, and if you don't deploy her, it's usually to spare her fatigue rather than that there's like a better unit around. The only chapters where you don't want Nana is when there's like no combat, like 12x, but in those cases it doesn't even really matter who you deploy, so I feel like almost everyone is equally bad or relatively the same there. So I say we put Nana, I think she's better than most of these units for sure. Once again, I'm getting like around Cecilia level of, nah, she's definitely better. I think she's like lower A tier is what I'm feeling right now. Like lower A tier. I think even Donna could agree to lower A tier for Nana. I don't think she's an S tier unit. I definitely think she's a bit below all these people here, but I don't think she's bad enough to put her in B tier. These are people with like already somewhat significant issues. I'm also noticing Fiora's like pretty high on A tier, but I guess Flyer Utility, yay. Next we have Parn, another good utility unit from FE5, and Parn was submitted by Giant Corkscrew once again, thank you. Parn is really good at stealing stuff. He has enough base build, I believe, to steal warp staves, and then just, you know, what else can he steal? I think there's like a couple chests he can get, but most of the time his utility is just stealing. You can steal tomes, that was right. Tomes and light swords. It's basically like if you have Lithis with like +1 build. I believe that's basically what his build is as a base. He gets like +1 from promotion, Lithis, and that's basically what Parn has, +1 too. So that's pretty cool. 5 movement stars is always fun to see him activate those. You can't rely on it, but it happens often enough to where you can like try for it at the start of your turn, see if it does something for you. He has Soul, which I don't think is a very good skill overall, but it can help him survive sometimes. There's this one spot where I usually warp him in to kill like to fight a bunch of mages with the fire sword equipped, and then steal a bunch of warp staves in that prison chapter, 21x. So Soul definitely helps his reliability a bit there, because I think if he gets hit by every single mage, he could die in theory, but Soul makes him survive almost all the time. So I think Parn is nice. He's only available for like half the game though, and his HP, like, he's kind of fragile in a little bit. He does have Vantage, and he can use the King Sword, so you can make him survive on enemy phase pretty easily if you need him to. But I find that exposing him to enemies can be a little risky. So I would say Parn is like a high B. Like definitely not low enough to be a C, and definitely better than a lot of these units. It's kind of hard to unit to rate though, because he's almost all utility. Kind of situational. He's not the greatest combat unit ever. He does have 5% critical, so if you want him to kill stuff, he can. So, it's just his strength is kind of low, and he needs some kind of good weapon to do it. So usually, he's not someone you send in there with like an iron weapon to kill everything, but if you give him the right weapon, he can still use his offense pretty well. And you can even use one to range, because there's like so many good swords you can give him. Good one to range swords, like the fire sword I just mentioned. Thunder sword works as well, gives him plus 25 crit basically, because of the +5 skill bonus. I would say, I think this is fairly reasonable for Parn. I think it's pretty good. I do think Nana is better though. I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but I think Nana is better than Parn overall. Next Thracian unit was submitted by Just Jacob. Both of them, in fact. Both of these are Just Jacobs. I guess I should just say Jacob. Anyway, thank you. Lenoan staff unit in Thracia is basically an automatic 5 stars, so she's already looking on her way to S or A tier. I have a lot of talking about staffs to do for Safi and Sias, so I guess I'll just save myself a bit of time and just sum them all up in like one go. Warp, Rescue, Rewarp, Restore, Magic Up, Torch. I probably forgot a couple, but those are the most important ones. Lenoan has a bit of trouble getting to A because she has C at base and not a whole lot else. I think she actually needs to get from like C +0 to B, and then she needs to promote. And Lenoan doesn't have access to a Nightcrest promotion. She has a story promotion. You need to visit the specific house very late into the game. So I feel like for most of the game, she's going to run around with like C to B level staffs, and that's not great. But that late game section where you have A rank staffs, that easily makes her like an S tier 5-star unit for the end of the game. Like, she can easily reach 20 magic, which is a threshold to reliably sleep or silence a bunch of the late game enemy mages that are around, and a lot of the late game like final bosses and stuff. That's really good. And then meanwhile, it's not like she's not doing anything, right? She's still providing like physics support, kind of like what Safi would do. Generally, if you have like some kind of task that needs a semi-high rank level staff, like a magic up or physic, it's good to let her or Sarah do it, but Sarah doesn't really need the staff rank very much because she already has B at base, and she promotes after like 3 levels of doing anything. So Lenoan is a pretty good target for those staffs just to get her staff rank up. And it automatically just kind of happens that she can use those very well. Her magic is good, like her growths are great. Next to Nana, probably the best candidate for the Wrath, because she can use Resire and almost no one else can, and she would appreciate the extra offense it gives her, as well as the extra survivability. One of the best units to have to take on enemy Dark Mages, especially the combo of Hell and that puts you 1 HP, and then the Poison Jormungandr. That can be really annoying to deal with, but she can do it because of the whole Wrath Nosferatu effect that works so well for Nana too. Nana can do it too, by the way, but she's a little better at it because her res is much higher, I guess. But I guess Nana does it just as well. I think she's more likely to want to kill with Nosferatu, so I guess it saves you uses. I guess that's one reason to do it that way. But I would say she's like really fragile. You need to protect her pretty well, but that is so easy because most of her good stabs work from range anyway. So unless you need to get like close to people to heal them, generally I think she's safe. I think this is most annoying in chapter 14X, the chapter where she joins for most people. But if you skip that guide, you still get her, so you can avoid that chapter and still get alone. Like, don't worry, you can still do it. So I would say she's like I think she's better than Nana. I think she's better than most of these people in this. I think she's better than the 3 Houses squad, and I would put her like around this level of utility, I think. Fergus better, I don't know. Fergus is definitely worse in the late game, but Fergus is around for so much longer that I think I'm okay with this. But I could see her like all the way up here, actually. I think she's that good. Chaz rates are a lot lower. I think that's always kind of interesting. People rate units like way differently, but I think Lenoan is super, super good. I don't even give her Wrath most of the time, but I still think her staff utility is just that good. Maybe some recency bias in there because, I mean, the last bit of Thracia that I played is the late game where she's at her best, but I just can't get over how useful something like a Restore is in the mid game. Then we have Olwen, like I said, submitted by Jacob, and I think Olwen's very interesting. I don't know if the episode went up at this point, where Mangs is doing the Olwen chapter, but that stuff is pretty interesting. Olwen is kind of not really controversial anymore, I feel like, but a pretty interesting unit. I kind of want to use her sometime, actually, because I'm not sure exactly anymore how good I think she is. Dire Thunder, her personal weapon, is a Brave Tome that's like, it's very lopsided. It's very heavy, but it doubles, so offensively that's fine. But it also weighs her down a lot, so her speed gets screwed over a lot. So her avoid and, you know, her getting doubled is like pretty annoying. But then it has like 14 might or something, so 2 shots just about anything with her base magic. Like I said, it's brave. It hits on resistance, so pretty much everything is gonna die. If she hits twice, that's the thing, because it's kind of inaccurate. That's like 70 hit. So if she attacks something on terrain, which is something that's going to happen in, say, the chapter right after she joins, you're going to like figure out quickly how unreliable she can be. A lot of people like giving her advantage and then having the enemy fight her, and then she just goes first and takes advantage because it works at full HP in that game, and you just strike twice and the enemy dies. That's the idea, I think. The problem is, of course, that if she doesn't hit twice, she's likely to die because she gets doubled. Although not a lot of enemies in Thracia actually double her, even with Dire Thunder, I think. She does have a base 0 AS, but a lot of people have like trouble reaching 4 speed, so maybe she won't. She can also just use Wind and just 2-hit KO someone. Like, she can double with Wind fairly reliably, if not after a couple level ups. Level ups for her kind of come slow because she joins Prepromoted. Her growths are good, but the level ups are definitely slow for Thracia and for promoted units because, I mean, enemies just don't give much XP since a lot of them are unpromoted. So I think Olwen is great. For now, I would put her in like, I think like a lower C is roughly where I'd put her. I think her reliability can be upped with like the King Sword and Leaf support, and like Nana to make her reliably hit stuff. That is an annoying bit to like tag her along with those units at all times, and it sucks that she can't function independently with that kind of combo. But at the same time, with Wind, she can still 2-hit KO stuff. It's just in Thracia, just combat in general is not the most useful thing ever, right? I guess it's also worth mentioning she can get the Holy Sword in the Reinhardt chapter. I usually end up warp skipping that chapter because it's just so much less painful. But you can get it if you want to. It's just kind of risky, right? Because if you talk to Reinhardt, there's like a chance that you have to fight Reinhardt, and there is no reliable way to kill Reinhardt unless you have Nihil on someone. And like Reinhardt has like so many luck-based skills that could just screw you over. Like, I mean, first of all, he just hits really hard with Dire Thunder. He has 5 movement stars, so he can move again towards you if you try to bait him or like kill someone. He can activate his Pavise, and he can activate Accost. All those are like really annoying. So, and he's adaptable as well, I think. Although his rate of activation of those skills is not that high when he's using Dire Thunder. And also the Holy Sword is like just kind of meh. Like, Olwen cannot use stabs, so the magic boost is not that great, and he already kills stuff with magic weapons anyway, so why does she need a magic boost all of a sudden? Like, is she trying to avoid getting silenced or something? I don't really know what the point of that is. And it gives her a Miracle, which you can't really rely on. It gives her Horse Effectiveness, which is pretty much worthless. There's like 1 chapter left where you're outdoors and able to fight horses. After that, they're just not present. So I know this is like a weapon intended to kill Reinhardt, but I just don't find it that useful. If I have to choose between warping someone to talk to Reinhardt or warping someone to get like a Pure Water village or something, I'm gonna take the Pure Water, honestly. I don't think the Holy Sword is that great, but it looks good on paper, I guess. It looks good on paper. Next we have Imelda by Aaron. Thank you very much, Aaron. And Imelda I really like. I think a lot of people recently have like I say a lot of people, but only like 776 people have played Thracia, of course. But Imelda, I think most people by now realize just how good she is thanks to her high base magic and the Fire Sword and the C rank and staves. I mean, C rank stabs is not great at that point in the game. You'd much rather have A or at least B for rescue, because I think rescue is B. But if you're gonna have a staff user, you're not gonna like. It's still nice to have someone who can use C stabs. I don't think it even hurts very much because there's still a lot of restoring and sleeping to do in the late game, which you can do with C stabs. And yeah, that's, you don't need high rank stabs on everyone, basically every turn. So Imelda still adds a lot to your army when you get her. Leadership star that she has is also kind of nice to have, and her fighting is okay. It's not great. She's not like a super tank, but she can take a couple hits and say that defend chapter 20, kill a couple of enemies here and there. She gets weighed down a lot by the brave sword, or by the master sword that she comes with. So I usually give her, I think the brave sword is a little lighter. I think a rapier works okay in her. Silver sword I think works very well on her. I think it doesn't even weigh her down. She can kill mages with that. She can help capturing some people. She has some nice utility. She's only around for a couple chapters, but when she's there, she's really freaking good. So that gives me some Vida vibes, because Vida is another unit that joins very late with almost no flaws. So I think I'm tempted to just put her over Vida. And, you know, honestly, .11x, 12x, all those chapters Warp is really good in, and it keeps being good. I actually Warp skipped chapter 13 before, the escape chapter. You can do some funny reinforcement blocking tricks with that one. I usually like Warp Asbel over to the boss, kill him, and then block all the reinforcement spots, and that trivializes the whole chapter. And even for chapters where you're not Warp skipping, she's still one of the only high rank staff users you have. It's until no one joins, you have no one else who can use Physic, or actually Salem can use it as well. I should mention that. He's also a good target for Physic spamming. So, not like a monopoly on those good staffs, but still has like all the good staffs available. She can use the rewarp she get in 14x to just teleport herself anywhere on the map, so that pretty much negates her move issue if it ever is one. It still costs a turn to use, but she can still catch up whenever she needs to, and that's valuable, I guess. But still, like restore, magic up, all that stuff she can do. Usually you will have someone else do it because it gives him staff rank, but the fact that Safi doesn't need to because she basically is going to have A rank staffs for like half of the game already is valuable on its own. It's kind of like how Jagans don't need to get EXP because other people have it. But just A rank staffs warp super good in Thracia. Like, one last thing I'll say about Safi, getting her to 20 magic is pretty nice too, for the same reasons as Alone. Being able to reach benchmark for Silence and Sleep, or Berserk, I guess, if you're being weird in a late game, is super nice. Definitely better than like all the FE5 units, like all the other FE5 units on this list. So like automatically goes like here. And honestly, I would put her above Dimitri. Dimitri is strong, and Battalion Wrath and Vantage is like the main reason he's this high. But I think Safi's utility in Thracia is too good. I think I had Safi at like top. I definitely had her in at like number 8 or something. Like I had all the staff used like Silk in around the same tier. Or like around the same area in the top 15, so I think it's fair to have Safi right here. It would be funny if like my top 15 ended up being out of order in here. I think that would be adorable. Next, I have a Sias for in these trying times. Sias joins very, 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 very late. With split units, I don't think I've had any of these where you have like a choice between 2 units to recruit, either Set or Sias. I'm trying to consistently not penalize people for like basically disabling you from recruiting the alternative. I think it's important to rate units on their own, like with the idea that they're already being recruited. Basically, the rating of these units starts the moment you've recruited them. So I'm not counting recruitment costs, and for me that includes their alternatives. So yes, he's worse than Set overall in combat, but first of all, he has things to compensate for that, and second of all, Set's contributions get rated in Set's department. Basically, I'm going to rate Set very highly because he's that good. I'm not going to penalize Sias for not being Set. That said, Sias is, if you just ignore Set for a moment, he is really good. He's still a late joining A rank staff user, just like Set, and most of the time that is what you need out of these units. And the fact that he has a movement star is kind of fun. The leadership is nice, it adds some reliability. Late game chapters, most of the time you hit reliably because most of the enemies are like dark mages or something. But in the final chapter, for example, you're facing a lot of enemy leadership from Veld and Ainz. So Sai is negating some of that effectively, giving you more hit and avoid on people. Is pretty cool. A lot of the combats happens through like sleep and silence to negate some enemies, so maybe not as reliable as I think it is, or maybe not as much utility as I'm like calling it right now, but I think it's still pretty nice. But he does have like 19 base magic or like 18 base magic, so he's pretty likely to be able to silence and sleep anything you need to. All those annoying dark mages with like Fenrir and you know, status staves are just super annoying, and having an extra guy that can take care of him is just super nice. He can't fight that well, but he can fight dark mages with lightning. I don't think he won rounds, especially not when he's facing like someone on a magic floor. But he can hold his own against like enemy dark mages if you really need him to. I don't remember he can use Resire though. That's not something I'm not sure about, but I don't think it impacts his rating overall, so I'm not gonna count him out for that. His availability is undeniably very low though, so I think he still ends up in like the B tier region somewhere. But on his own, he's fine. I would recommend most players to recruit Set over Sias, just because that brain dead combat is just super nice to have as a beginner. Nothing you have to worry about things. But if you've played Thracia before, you definitely want to try Sias out at least once, because I think it's pretty fun to use. But I mean, it's hard to compete with 4 Seti and just flushing everything down the toilet, though. I will realize that. So I'm gonna put him like around here somewhere. I think it's fair. This feels okay to me. It's kind of hard to rate him because the unit that joins so late. It's like you have to be very sure about exactly how much you value each contribution that he has. But yeah, that's Sias, submitted by Melvin Lou, by the way. Thank you very much. Okay, so next on the list we have Laura, submitted by Jesus Kun 69. Still the best username on my Patreon right now, besides maybe God and, well, there's a couple of other good ones, but Jesus Kun is pretty good. And so is Laura. I think I've talked about her before. I don't remember exactly when. I think it must have just been Mags's Fire Emblem 5 Let's Play. Laura is one of the most interesting units in the franchise, I feel like. Not interesting enough to where I'd maybe do a waifu on her, because the reasons why she's good is like straightforward. But I can't think of a single other unit in like the whole franchise that has both Thief Utility and Dancer Utility. That's pretty unique. She joins in Chapter 4 as a thief, a very fragile one, not useful for much other than stealing vulneraries, getting captured, and of course opening locks using her lockpicks. But then in Chapter 12, or 12X actually, you can turn 1 transform her into a dancer through a certain recruitment, and suddenly you have a dancer, and dancers are always good. I think Mangs rated her about like 4 stars. I was like, alright, dancer, easy 5 stars. Especially when we already discussed all these good staff units that have been submitted already. That maybe go like, actually, you know, if you, like, think of all the utility that Safi gives you late in the game and realize that Lara can just double it straight up, like straight off the bat. Like, that shit is super, super strong. And then in addition, if Safi's not your best unit at the point, you can revitalize someone else. You can revitalize, I don't know, your best attacker. You can get Orson to attack someone else. You can get Dagger to capture someone. You can get Finn to capture someone. You can get Sarah to get another turn, get a bunch more XP. Any staff user can just be replicated like that. If someone has been, like, if someone tried something, like, let's say you have like a character that needs to kill a boss, you can warp them to kill the boss, and if they fail to kill the boss, you can rescue them, and then have Lara dance for that character that was trying to kill a boss, and then warp them in again and try it again or something. You would probably never do that, but that's just one of the many things that you can do. She's so versatile as a dancer, because FE5 has such good actions to do, and duplicating those is just insane. So I think that makes her more strong as a dancer than, for example, Larum or Ninian or Tethys. I think those have some good characters to refresh too, but FE5 just has really, really like strong player characters with a lot of options, and Lara duplicating those options is super powerful. And then just rescue bait on its own is, I mean, almost anyone can do it, but Lara is like the best at it because her build is so low. Sometimes when I'm like capture baiting with someone like Lithis, I find that an enemy might have too much build, they don't get captured, and the enemy attacks him instead, and it just scares me because he usually doesn't have a scroll. But Lara, she gets captured by anything, so she's the most reliable capture bait ever. And capture bait, I think, actually like breaks FE5, especially the master part, really hard. So I think that's also like something that's really in our favor. So yeah, between capture bait, dancing, and thief utility, I think it's fair to say that Lara belongs in S tier. Maybe not the highest out of anyone, but I'd definitely put her right around here somewhere. I'm trying to think. She's just really good. It's really hard to rank these S tiers because they're so good. Jake feels really out of place, I gotta say. I don't know why. And I think I might move Dagger down a tier actually to like be the same tier as Finn. I kind of discussed this last time, but now looking at it with like giving it a fresh look, so to speak, I think Dagger is fine to move down to the A tier, or Finn up to S tier. One of the two. I think they need to be in the same tier, definitely. And I think Finn is actually better overall. Yeah, they have like the Finn's performance is so good. I feel like he's more reliable overall than Dagger at the things that they could both do. And even indoors, I think the leadership star is often just as good as Dagdar's added combat. But Dagdar's indoor combat is still much better than Finn's, so I could just as easily see this the other way around. I'm very much in doubt about it, but he feels a bit out of place in S tier with Finn here, and I don't think Finn is S tier. So I'm going to fix that real quick. Next we have Marty. Marty was submitted by Command List, and so was Orson. So thanks for both of these Ruddy Axe users. Marty is, I mean, I don't have to introduce you to Marty memes, I hope. The Marty party meme. I still have this old ship post with just the Marty's face dancing around the screen with some copyright-free music in the background. That was one of my favorite ship posts. Definitely, I need to re-listen to it because it was pretty hilarious. Marty as a unit though was, I actually got it. I argued with Jazz a little bit about like why I think Marty is better than just like the most memeiest units in the series. Like I think he's like E tier. He might be like F tier considering everything. But the reason I think Marty is better than, say, Miranda or Shanam is, well, first of all, he's just available a lot more. He joins at like the start of the game, so just by that alone, he can rack up a lot of utility. Even if you don't train him, just having him be able to rescue drop people, not just like player units, but mostly enemies. I find it very useful to have like Finn or Dagdar capture an enemy and have Marty run up to them, just take the items off the whatever they captured, then swap them to themselves and release them, so that Dagdar and Finn are free to do something else next turn. Whereas if you don't have Marty do that, maybe someone like Orson or Halvin or Dagdar or Finn themselves has to waste their turn doing it. And I think that adds some value to the early game chapters. Of course, the early game chapters aren't really hard, but he definitely saves you some time and efficiency there. Now, as the game goes on, that utility is less appreciated. Marty doesn't really have good growth offensively. His strength roll is only like 20%. His base is good though. It has like 9 strength or something. So with the Brave Axe, if you want to make him 2 KO shit, he can. He really can become like a competent fighting unit if you just work really hard. But it's never going to be reliable because his skill is 0 and his speed is 0. And his build is so high that rescue dropping him is basically impossible without losing speed. So he is definitely hard to use, but I don't think it's unsalvageable. And his promotion bonus is actually really good. It's like +6 speed and +6 skill or something. It reminds me of the FE6 Warrior promotion bonus. It's not bad. He basically becomes another Dagdar. I mean, Dagdar peaks in the early game, but mid-game Dagdar and end-game Dagdar are still kind of strong. He just has kind of a low X rank though. He's only got D axes at base, I believe. But yeah, I think Marty's combat is not as bad as you might think at first glance. It is bad at base, but if you promote him at level 10, it's actually fine. It's I don't know. I feel like he's better at combat than someone like I don't know, Alba Arcane. I'd rather use him at level 10-1 than Alba Arcane at level 10-1, like early promoted. But he's still, don't get me wrong, he's still like a meme unit. He's still bad. He still has 0 speed and 0 skill at base. He still never doubles. I'm just saying there's ways to make him work. Like if you have the Wrath manual left over, you're not doing Wrath, Nana, or Lenoan, then Marty can just kill things on enemy phase. He's not that terrible. So I'm still gonna keep him like around here, maybe put him like up here somewhere. I think he has enough free utility to be in like E tier, and I think his long-term salvageableness is better than these memes over here. Yeah, I think he's alright. And Orson, again, submitted by Command List as well. Of course, is a much better orson than Marty, like a really good version of him in a way. I've almost never seen a character that joins in a Fire Emblem game as early as Orson does, with 1-2 range and good offense and enough bulk to not like be a glass cannon. Like the combination of 1-2 range and insanely high crit on both his first counterattack with Wrath and as well as with Pooji when it double attacks, I can't think of another game. And again, credit to Thracia, and I know I love that game, but credit to Thracia for putting a unit like that in, but it's still a fun game to play that isn't like completely broken beyond belief. Like it's still a fairly difficult game, especially for newcomers. Even though this guy is like one of the best combat units ever created, probably. I don't think he belongs quite in S tier because in Thracia combat isn't everything, and Orson doesn't have much combat, or doesn't have much utility outside of that combat. And I think the S tiers have something that he doesn't have, or some things I should say. Maybe not in the context of Thracia, except for like Lara and Asbel and Safi. Those have some utility, and in the Asbel's case, like he has like really good offense as well and less durability, but his boss killing I think puts him above Orson by like a mile. Orson is like great. I think I'd sooner put him like at the top of A tier. I think you can actually debate whether he's better or worse than Finn and Dagdar. I think. I don't know about Fergus. I usually had like a really long argument about like whether Orson was even better than Fergus. I think I'm now going to concede that argument. I used to think Fergus was better. I'm just going to put Orson above him now. I can see it go either way. I think being good in Manster is better than being good in the chapters before that, but I think Orson is better in the long term. I think the perpetual 1-2 range from the Puji is better than Fergus having to use the Fire Sword. I think multi-utility in Thracia is like alright, but not so fantastic that it puts Orson's other advantages to shame, because Fergus's offense can be a little unreliable, whereas Orson can kill just about anything you want him to. And the same goes for these two. They are like... They're a little like... Dagdar's more bulky and Finn is also more durable in general. And then Finn is like... They have like capturing utility. And Finn is leadership star. I think that still surpasses Orson's great combat, but honestly in a good FE5 run you'll make use of all 4 of these units, or like a combination of them. I could even see Lenoan being better than both of these, come to think of it, but I'm going to keep it the way it is for now. It seems weird to like group these units together, but Thracia is so well balanced in these ways that it feels natural. It's kind of like in 3 houses where these units are lined up in like a similar position too. Next up we have Klein from FE6, submitted by Seraph, so thank you very much. Good mid-game utility. I actually recently rated Klein in the sniper tier list. So, like for those who don't know, I also do the archetype tier lists, and those are I just have like units that are like very similar, like similar archetypes, like all the snipers from Fire Emblem, or all the early game thieves, or all the early game clerics, or what have you, mage girls, that kind of stuff. And sometimes that means a unit comes up multiple times in tier lists, because, you know, I'm tiering every single character in here, so obviously people are going to be here Klein, going to be here twice. But that's a good opportunity for me to like revise my opinion a little bit, see if the comment section changed my mind a little bit. Not a whole lot of people commented on Klein's position. I don't actually remember where I put him exactly. If I had to guess, it's like C or B tier. He is fortunate enough to be a sniper in a game where being a sniper is pretty good. FE6 is a very player phase based game for the most part. There's a lot of enemies and a lot of enemy phase, but it's very hard to kill enemies on enemy phase, so that makes it more important to have a good player phase, and it makes it more important to avoid counterattacks, because the enemies are competent, so ignoring counterattacks is significant. For example, FE7, enemies are not as competent, so you don't really care about taking a counter from them, and as a result, you don't really care if a unit takes a counterattack. So for that reason, I think it's okay to put Klein somewhere in the C tier, I think still, because I do think his late game offense is not that great. He has some speed issues with doubling. He has like a single strong hit with the silver bow, but as more people are capable of using the silver bow and like divine weapons as well, that isn't really that special anymore. He cannot really one-round Wyvern Knights for one, I think. You might be able to one-shot some of them with a Warglaze, which you definitely can use in late game. He has a really high A rank in bows, which is super nice for him. But overall, he still only attacks once per turn, and that does suck a little bit, but it's easy to keep him safe. And in the context of FE6, it makes sense to keep him safe at all times. You definitely have to play a little bit safer in FE6. Whereas in FE7, you just put people with javelins and enemy range. You just go, 1-2 range, go brrr. So I think Klein is going to end up somewhere in C tier. Around loot level utility, maybe above Brighton, maybe above Marita. I don't know about Ford. I think this is about reasonable for him. I think he's alright. I don't think he's super excellent though. But I think he does well. He's a pretty competent sniper overall. The best sniper in the game, you would argue, unless you think Igren's higher stats beat his availability. Igren isn't here yet, but she'll probably be submitted soon. Alright, so let's move on to Garrett. Next on the list we have Garrett, still doing Binding Blade characters, and I've been told that Garrett needs to be not underrated. He needs to be looked at properly. We need to not overlook him. We need to, you know, make sure we are very awake when we're looking at him, if you will. So I like Garrett a little bit more after watching Mags's Iron Man. I always thought he was pretty decent. I actually think he's better than Gonzalez and Geese overall, if you're looking at how much effort you have to put into them versus how much you get out of them. I think for the most part they can do similar things. The biggest difference between those and like a lot of good units in general is Garrett's speed. It's really nice that he's a berserker and that he has a really high crit rate, but it would be so much better if you could also double attack. And I think he actually has around the same base speed as Hawkeye, at least on hard mode. I think he's like around 10 or 11. So that sounds good in theory, but in practice, FE6 enemies are a lot faster than FE7 enemies, so he actually ends up a lot worse. And the Brave Axe is also a lot worse in this game. Very inaccurate and still very heavy. So yeah, kind of options that are available to Hawkeye are not really available for Garrett, and that kind of sucks. And his accuracy is also a problem. Iron Axes and Killer Axes only have like 65 hits, so Garrett is very rarely even having 100 hit before enemy avoid, and enemy avoid is also a lot higher than FE7. The enemies have a luck stat and they have higher speed on average, so accuracy is a bit of a problem. So if you give Garrett a Killer Axe, generally one or two things happen. One of the two things, I should say. One is that he hits and crits and the enemy dies, because, you know, he has like a 30 crit bonus as a Berserker in FE6, and the Killer Axe alone is going to make that like 60 crit. So the enemy will probably die. The other possibility is that he misses and he does 0 damage, and that's kind of tough to plan around sometimes. But if you have Garrett face like 5 enemies on enemy face, you just put him on a peak, have him fight a bunch of wyverns, chances are he'll kill like 3 out of 5 of them. And that's good enough for me. That's pretty decent. So his only real drawback besides the things I mentioned are like kind of a low availability towards like a little over halfway past the midpoint of the game. So that's not great, but I still think he's decent, and especially for a unit you have to put no effort into training. It's pretty good. The one thing I really hate about him is his low axe rank. He joins with a C in axes in a game where you need 50 weapon XP, and there's no weapons that give you more weapon XP like the Devil Axe or the Steel Axe. Not that using a Devil Axe is a great idea, but you know, just in theory. So it's actually like pretty hard to get into Armad's level, but I think Max's Armad has shown that if you're using a unit enough, they can still get to S rank, even if they join with a C rank past the mid game. So I don't think that's a big of an issue, especially for someone like Garrett who usually kills when he hits something. That kills does give double weapon XP, so he can still get that. I think it's about 150 weapon XP he needs. C to B, B to A, yeah, A to S, that works, yeah. So I think he does pretty well overall. I don't think he's as good as, say, Vida is when she joins. He does join earlier. I would say he's like at the top of C tier roughly. Below Ford probably, maybe worse than Klein a little bit. I would say around here, yeah, it's pretty reasonable. I think like in the long past people would put him like way down here somewhere because pre-promoted, but and like his growths are bad, sure, but I think Galarian Max over here does pretty well. So then we have Lou, and I need to check real quick who made these suggestions, because Garrett was suggested by Ewan DeVoe, and Lou has been suggested by T-Class45, so thank you both. And I think Lou is pretty cool. It used to be that everyone just thought Lou was like really, really good, just because he's an early joining mage and he's pretty easy to train. People like the high accuracy of the Fire Tome in particular, I think. And those are still good pros, but over time a lot more people realized that Lou has some definite weaknesses. I remember in those old debating days there was a debate between someone defending Lou and someone defending Echidna, and people will still assume supports when debating these kind of things, so it was kind of silly. But Echidna ended up looking a lot better in that debate, particularly in the durability department, because that's really a huge issue with Lou. For one, there's Steel Axe fighters that can one-round him, that can 1-KO him, I should say, in Chapter 5. That is a bit of a problem. They're very inaccurate, but you know, when the consequence of getting hit is so drastic, like you just literally die, yeah, that's pretty bad. And as he grows, that 1-kill problem kind of goes away. I think once you get, like, especially after he promotes, that 1-kill problem is not really there, but there are still enemies that double him sometimes. I think early game mercenaries can double him for once, and they also kill him in one round. Nomads, same story, I think. As he grows, his speed gets better, and the promotion bonus gives him some durability. I think the biggest reason, the biggest boon that Lou has is his promotion. His magic is kind of average at first. I would actually say it's kind of bad. I think he's like a 4 base and then like a 40 growth or something, which is pretty bleh. But once he promotes, he gets like +4, +5, and since Lou is also pretty fast enough to double most of the time, he will probably one-round enemies at that point because their res is pretty low still. That is one stat in FE6 doesn't get very boosted. So that makes him decent. And since he's around a lot, and he is very accurate when he's using Fire Tome, and even when he's using a Thunder Tome, he's decently accurate. That's pretty nice. I do think he's better than Lilina, for instance, who joins later with no real advantages. Like, even her magic is lower for quite some time until she promotes as well. I'm not saying Lou's promoted when Lilina joins, but he probably promotes sooner than she does. So that pretty much widens them. And her base magic isn't even that better that much. It's gonna grow higher, but her speed is so much lower that she's not gonna double a whole lot. So I do think Lou's the better mage in the game. So where does that end up putting him? Well, I think he's better than Garrett, for one, and probably better than Klein overall. I would actually say he's better than Ford. I have trouble putting him up in B tier. I guess he's like about the level of like Urk and Muriel. I think he's better than Urk overall. It's kind of weird seeing him above Vida, but Vida does have that weird availability. I think Lou is like a solid B tier unit. I don't think he's better than Cecilia, for instance. Like, just comparing him for like units within the same game, because that's the easiest as like a benchmark. Worse than Echidna, I think I could argue either way. I do like that Lou gets stabs after promotion, that he can heal people, but it's only E-rank stab, so it doesn't do very much. So I don't think that's like high enough to get over these utility units here. I could see him over Ogma maybe though. So maybe there's some switching here possible, but I think overall is like a decent position for him. I could see him being worse than Kyle actually. I do think Kyle's better. So yeah, that works. Then we have Lots, and very unremarkable character until Mag started using him as an Iron Man in his tanky. He went into the tank business, let's just put it that way. And then he went into the arena business, and that was a very bad career switch for him. So Lot joins very early, and there's a couple of things that make him like really interesting to use if you want to in a casual playthrough. One of them is that he supports both Deke and Wade. Now, Wade is not a very good long-term unit, but in the early game, if you give him that Wade support, he actually gets pretty good bonuses. I think Deke is Anima, I think Lot is Anima, and Wade is Fire, so they get full attack and full avoid. And the Fire Affinity from Wade also gives him some hit to work with, which is very welcome, because as I said, axes are so inaccurate in FE6, and that's a big problem for these kind of units. But Lot's stats overall don't stand out at all. His bases and growths are very balanced. Now, balance used to be a very big pro for using units. It was like something I really criticized the Fire Emblem Wiki for. But it turns out that balance in the case of Lot generally means insufficient in a lot of cases. I find that kind of like Ford, his strength is usually too low to one round anything but soldiers. His speed is usually too low to double anything but soldiers or knights. And from there it just gets worse. Like, I find none of his stats besides maybe his somewhat high HP are like very good. You can get RNG blessed, of course, but that isn't really a good argument for any of it. I don't think Lot's stats are good enough to compete most of the time. The supports though, if he gets the Deke support and then maybe the Wade support or some other kind of support, I think he supports Echidna as well, for example. So that's like an ice affinity. If you can get those in like a casual playthrough, you hold up fine, because avoid stacking in FE6 is so good. When all the weapons are so inaccurate, that's pretty good. But overall, I found that Lot, despite having like quote-unquote average speed because of his growths and somewhat okay base, you can still get doubled by enemy mercenaries, for instance. Still gets doubled by enemy nomads, nomad troopers, sword masters, that kind of stuff. Still not a very accurate unit. I think in general, the warrior promotion gains in this game are very good, but I'd still rather be a berserker, for instance, because those have a lot of crit, and I can let you just one round something straight up. I do think Garrett, for example, you get much more value out of Garrett, I think, than a Lot out of unit. But Lot does have early game utility. There is a lot of enemies in the early game that you want to kill, and not enough competent units to do so. So Lot will definitely help you out no matter what. But I think it's going to end up in like the lower C tier somewhere. I would say around Brighton, maybe around Renolf level is reasonable for him. So I'm going to put him around here. I think he's alright. I think he can work in a casual playthrough, but I don't think he's really like a B tier unit or anything. I think I would never call Lot a good unit unless he gets RNG blessed. So Lot was suggested to me by Joseph Garcia. Thank you very much. And next we have the Chad suggested by Skylar. And boy, Chad. Chad, I think is... I used Chad on my first playthrough, like a lot of people, and I looked up his growth. I was like, wow, that's so good. He has like insanely good growth. I think his strength and speed and stuff, they're all above 40%, which is kind of a rarity in FE6. And then I used him. And then I think at some point, I don't know if I looked it up beforehand or not, or if I just thought that training him was a good idea or not, but it turns out he doesn't promote, and there's no assassin class in FE6. Of course, I played FE7 first, and FE6 I think was like the third Fire Emblem I played. So I just kind of assumed he would promote at first, but he just doesn't, and that's unfortunate. His growths are good. His durability is not. He's another one of these units, just like Lou, that just gets one-shot by early game axe users. Of course, he has weapon triangle, so he's a bit harder to hit. What I like doing in Chapter 5 sometimes is I use Chad's 6 move and swords to move to that little corner in the mountains where, like on the left side of the map in Chapter 5, just put him on a mountain and have him distract the enemies that come from over the mountains. And that way my units don't have to deal with them until they're ready for it. And I think they have like 1 hit on Chad or something, or like less than 5 with 2 RN, so they'll pretty much never hit him. If he does hit, it's hilarious, so it's a win-win either way. And that distraction is pretty helpful. Other than that, he got some good treasure that no one else can get, particularly in Chapter 6. I like the Chapter 3 treasure. It's kind of hard to get in the LTC, but I usually play casually. So getting the halberd is nice, getting some gold is nice. Gold is always good value in FE6, whether you want to buy early game equipment or when you want to buy boots later. Both of those are very good goals to get gold for. And there's no one else who can do it, so raiding those chests is nice. And then Chapter 6 is like, it has like a goddess icon and a second silver lance, a bunch of gold. some treasure I'm forgetting. So all that stuff is really nice for him. I like Chad's utility a lot. For the desert chapter, people like using him for picking up items. I generally find myself just using the reset trick to make sure my other units just get all the treasure. Google it if I haven't seen it already. You can make like any units find the treasure, so I just use mages instead because they have like full move. But Chad can do that technically too, I guess, if you're not willing to exploit glitches, which I sometimes am because I'm like that. So where does that leave Chad? Thieves are hard to rate because they pretty much never really fight. I don't think Chad is meant for combat. Skylar said he does like using Chad for combat. After my first playthrough, I feel like I learned my lesson. I think with training thieves is they're usually worse at combat than other units, even considering Chad's higher growths because his bases are just so trash and it takes him a while to catch up. Like, even though his growths are better than Rutgers, he's never catching up to his stats, for instance. If you train a thief, you'll get less out of it than other units. That's just the law of Fire Emblem in general. Because if there's a map with no chests, then he's still going to be worse than your other units at fighting, so you kind of don't want to use him almost, unless you're like... I mean, if your goal is to train Chad, you'll probably deploy him anyway just to fight and training any experience. But he's probably going to be worse than your other units. And in maps where there's trash, or where there's treasure, or trasher, whatever you want to say, if you send him to a chest, he's not fighting. And the double bad thing about this is if you use him to get supports on other units, then say he's supporting Lou, and then he goes to get treasure, then Lou can't be near combat and also get support bonuses. So no matter what, you're screwing someone out of support bonuses, or you're getting the treasure late. So either way, it can be kind of annoying to support a thief as well. And I'm saying supports a lot because Mags's Iron Mans are on my mind and use supports a lot. But I think a lot of people use supports in FE6 when they play hard mode for the first time and they just spam enter to get support bonuses. So I think Chad's thief support is about the same as Matthew's roughly, so I'm probably just going to put them close to each other. It could be a little lower, it could be a little higher. I think Chad overall, there's a lot of good treasure in both games, so it's pretty hard to rate them differently. I'm going to put him like below Matthew. I don't think the promotion that Matthew has as an option is very significant. I think either way they're going to be most reliant on their thief utility for their brownie points, but I could be swayed either way. Next on the list, we have some units from Fire Emblem: The Blazing Blade. We have Isadora, Hector, Dorcas, Sane, Geets, and let's see who suggested these wonderful units. These are some interesting units. Let's just say it that way. God himself has suggested Isadora, so better be careful where we place him or replace her, because otherwise God is going to smite us probably. I've always said I've been a fan of Isadora. I always thought she was a little underrated. Made a waifu video on her. But I'll just say it once again because people keep misinterpreting my point. I've never said that Isadora is a top tier unit. When I rate units like Isadora highly, it's partially because you put almost no resources into them. You give them almost nothing to work with, no experience, no promotion item, no anything, and they still perform pretty good. And they're still generally better than someone who hasn't been trained, or like someone you put a lot of investment to and they still perform like mediocrely. Like, Isadora is not as good as, say, a trained Kent or Sane promoted at level 20 or something, but she actually holds up pretty well in comparison, especially when you take her weapon ranks into account. A swords, and then I think B lances, and then like D, C axes, if on the top of my head. I don't remember if she can use killer axes at base, but generally you want to use killer lances or killing edges anyway. So Isadora is just a case of you put almost nothing into it and you get a pretty good performance. The big thing about Isadora is when I was making waifu footage, I was pretty surprised to see that she can one-round almost every single enemy other than like a promoted hero or something. Almost everything else she can one-round, but she needs the right weapon for it. And if she doesn't have the right weapon, she can resort to like a killer weapon. But generally something like a silver sword will let her one-round anything that she faces. Almost anything. Besides those heroes and like bosses, of course. But for example, like if you want to beat a knight, you can use a hammer. If you want to beat a brigand, you can use a steel sword or something. If you want to beat a pirate, use a steel sword. Wyverns with an axe reaver, you can use a worm slayer, for example. If you want to fight mages, you can use like a javelin or a hand axe. That is one of the big problems with Isadora compared to other paladins and like other units in general, is 1-2 range weapons are too weak for her to one-round. She generally needs like weapon triangle advantage and or effectiveness damage to get the kill, because her strength is good. It's actually like around the same as like a promoted Kent, believe it or not. It's around 13 or 14, I believe. Sounds a little bit high, but that's roughly what it is, which is enough to truth KO, but only with like an effective or like a good weapon. Not a bad weapon, basically. So like javelins and hand axes are kind of bad weapons stat-wise. They're good before 1-2 range, but their actual stats other than that are kind of garbage, and that kind of sucks. And of course, a lot of people when they talk about Isadora, they're like, oh god, she gets weighed down. But guess what? Isadora's so fast she doesn't care. She can still double. I think her attack speed in general is overkill by like 4 or 5 points, so she can definitely afford to be weighed down. And if you still find it too troublesome, there is a body ring you can give her. I don't think it's necessary, and it reduces her ability to rescue a little bit, but it is an option. It depends on whether you prefer her to be able to rescue more people or to have better combat. Also helps with the whole javelin hand axe problem. But yeah, of course Isidore only has 5 inventory slots and limited durability as well. That is the one thing I don't like about being weighed down with her, is it reduces her durability a bit. If she doesn't have weapon triangle or terrain to work with, then that kind of makes her a little bit more frail. She's not like made of glass or anything, she's not Nino or Lina. Her durability is more around the lines of like unpromoted Canas, or what's the other one I used for comparison in my waifu videos? It was Fiora, I think. But with no bow weakness, so generally fairly sturdy, reasonably good res too compared to a lot of trained units. I find that pre-promotes generally have more res than unpromoted ones. So I would say Isadora is like an upper C or a lower B overall. I think she's decent, and people give her some crap for not being as good as the other paladins, but as far as I'm concerned, the 5th best paladin in the game is still a pretty good unit as long as their stats hold up. In a vacuum, Isadora looks pretty good. Compared to most other units, Isadora looks pretty good. I would say she's around here, like maybe like Garrett and Klein are like interesting units to compare her to. One stupid thing about Isadora is like FE7 has like very limited deployment slots, so finding a spot for Isadora can sometimes be a little tricky. Especially if you've trained a lot of other units, it's hard to be like justify the space for her. You don't want to deploy someone like Raven or Canas just to deploy Isadora generally, so that can be kind of annoying. I also noticed that Isadora was very useless in a ranked run of FE7 because she doesn't gain a lot of EXP, so most of the time you just don't want to deploy her. It's another thing that I think kind of puts people off of Isadora sometimes, especially when we used to rank characters by how good they were in a ranked run. So I guess in those kind of contexts you can use it to weaken enemies. That can be something she can do, I guess. But getting kills with her is kind of a no-no in those kind of ranked runs. Especially in FE7 where the XP requirements are so tight. I would maybe even put her like around here somewhere. I don't know, Marita seems worse though. But Garrett, in the context of FE6, actually, for example, seems a little bit better. And it's weird to say, because people used to think that Garrett was a lot worse, whereas Isadora was just kind of, everyone's just kind of like, meh, whatever. But Isadora I think is okay. I think she's pretty good. I would maybe put her, like, I'm half tempted to put her up to B tier, but people will yell at me if I do, I think. They'll yell like, oh my god, Mekkah biased. Alright, Stuart Graves suggested Hector from Fire Emblem 7, so we're gonna get into these FE7 units. Oh, we're still in the FE7 units, actually, I'm dumb. Hector good. I think everyone knows Hector good. Exactly how good has been a question of the ages. It used to be that Hector was like banned from the bait tournaments because you were forced to deploy your lord, and that automatically makes him good apparently, because if you have to deal with their lordliness all game long, that makes him somehow good. You're totally forced to use Hector. Now, I think for someone like Hector, this isn't really big of an issue. It would be like, if we talk about Lyn or Eliwood or even Ike from FE9, I think there's something to say for not using your lord very actively, but for Hector there's really no reason not to use him in the early game because he's one of your better units. He starts off a little slow because of his low base HP, but his weapon, the Wolf Beal, pretty much makes him viable immediately, and his strength and defense are good and will just grow into like really high levels. His speed is a little shaky. I find that in FE7 he usually doesn't double. I think he's around the same speed as Oswin, and I think anyone using those units will know that like eventually they'll start doubling and killing things sometimes, especially when enemies start weighing themselves down with steel weapons or reaver weapons or even ranged weapons. But he's a little shaky on it overall. He's not doubling bosses, but his strength is enormous, his defense is enormous. Having an extra tank in the early game is super nice. Not a lot of durable units early on, a lot more squishy units that you gotta protect. You only have Marcus and Oswin and Hector to do it pretty much, and Alone can take like a hit or two, but eventually he's kind of run down too. So having Hector is just super nice in the early game. And there's a lot of bosses that are weak to the Wolf Beal early on. I think like their first 5 or 6 bosses are weak to the Wolf Beal basically. Like Wire and Boys and whatever else is out there. So he's pretty useful against those. Mage is of course not his strong suit, but you don't really face a whole lot of them. Generally his physical durability is a lot more important than magical durability. The biggest problem with the Hector is the problem with Lords is just their promotion. He promotes very late. Even if you're playing Eliwood mode, Hector promotes like past halfway through the game and competes with Lyn for a promotion item. Of course, I don't think that's a big deal because I don't think Lyn is very good and I think you shouldn't use her. So generally for Hector, it's not a big of an issue. And in Hector Hard mode, he promotes, I mean, he doesn't use the Heaven Seal game mechanic wise, but he still promotes so late, later than ever. Promotes after like Cog of Destiny, I think. So that sucks. Until then he's stuck at 5 move. His combat isn't bad per se, he can still kill Cavaliers and stuff. I think a lot of people haven't level capped at level 20 at that point. I usually try not to level cap Hector because I know he's going to get a couple kills here and there, so I don't make it a priority to feed him kills. A lot of people train Hector just for Geets, honestly, just to get him. And a lot of people just use Hector in general. But yeah, 5 move and not being able to promote for a long time is pretty goddamn bad. Some might be tempted to say he's locked to axes. I think for a unit like that, when you're using best weapon type, do you really want to phrase it as locked to axes? Isn't it more like you can use axes and that's good? Axes are the best weapon type in FE7, maybe besides lances. They like share a top spot, I feel like. A lot of the enemies have lances, so having triangle advantage over them is super nice. It kind of stacks with the Wolf Beal. Super nice against someone like Eric. I think he has a shot at one-shotting them depending on his growth. So, God, Eric, Hector's pretty good at fighting early on. It's just, in the mid to late game, I find him very underwhelming. A lot more magic in the late game as well, in the mid to late game, that he's vulnerable to. So a bit of a mixed reception overall for Hector. I would still put him in like at least B tier, I think. That might sound a little low, but I think past chapter, like past Dragon's Gate or so, I find that Hector is a lot weaker than comparatively compared to the early game. That's when your units start promoting, and that's when his early game powers kind of start to wear down. Your only units are a lot more durable at this point, so his tankiness is less of an asset, and you're more looking for people who can, you know, take a lot of enemies and then also one-round them, and Hector doesn't do that all the time. So B tier seems about nice. I would still put him above a lot of these units, don't get me wrong. Maybe above Cecilia, around that level seems alright. I don't know about Baruka. I do think he's better than Soren, actually. Maybe not an LTC setting where for casual players, like Hector is super nice for tanking. So a bit of a mix between those. Hawkeye, is he worse than Hawkeye? I don't know about that. We'll put him here for now. I think he's definitely very strong. I think a lot of, like, this is not an anecdote from me, but I remember there was a thread a while ago on a Fire Emblem subreddit where I think someone linked to an Ask Reddit thread, which is like a super big Reddit where a lot of people are, not just Fire Emblem players, but like everyone in the world is who's on Reddit has seen that subreddit and checks it out sometimes, depending on what they like or not. The point is, big place, and there was like a player's like, ah man, it was like a thread about video game characters, and the guy was like, man, I loved Hector in my playthrough. He doubled and killed everything. He's so good. And there were some people that were like tagging me in the Fire Emblem subreddit thread, going like, hey Mekkah, get in there. They're doing pitfalls. You know, they're saying dumb things like Hector's super good. Don't they know that he has like 5 move and he's unpromoted for a while, promotes late, and lords are overrated and all that stuff. And someone like Marcus is way better. And I was like, you know what? You could go in there and then go all pitfall on them, but why? Like, what are you trying to prove? That you know the game better than they do because you played it like a lot more times? What's the point of that? This guy is just saying his experiences with Hector and saying how much he loved the game doing that. Why would you try to like piss on his fun by saying, well, actually, according to our tier list standards, Hector isn't all that good? Why? What's the point of that? Just something I was reminded of. So I feel like a lot of people feel like I should set everyone straight on Fire Emblem or something. Even when I ask them, like, no, I like educating people in my videos, and I like talking to people about Fire Emblem, answering questions, but I'm not going to go into an Ask Reddit thread to correct people on their tiering of Hector. Like, who cares? It's just a hobby, man. It's just a game. Why you have to be mad? Next up is the meme himself, Dorcas, and after this we will finally know what happens to Dorcas on this tier list. So Dorcas, you could draw a lot of parallels to Hector because they join around the same time. They both use axes for pretty much the entire time, and they both have high strength and high HP, and speed is okay for Hector. For Dorcas, it's downright terrible most of the time. His base is actually pretty decent at 6. I actually like his speed base. It's about average, maybe above average, but it stops him from getting doubled by most things. Like I think even mercenaries have trouble doubling him sometimes, but his speed growth is atrocious at 20%. That is the big thing that hurts Dorcas a lot, is his inability to double enemies. It's not that he gets doubled very much, but I think his speed is around one of the lowest in the game. It's like maybe Wallace is slower, and that's about it. Everyone else is faster. Even Oswin is faster. And this is super annoying, because if you don't double, you generally don't one round. Unless you have like really high strength. And Dorcas does have like some of the highest attack power in the game. Especially considering he can get the Silver Axe. If you get into A rank axes at some point, you can get a Chapter 15 Silver Axe. You can one-shot some mages with that. And of course you can buy killer axes in Dragon's Gate, or like Fida's shop to get one-hit KOs that way. But one-hit KOing is a lot harder than you think, and sometimes you won't do it with the hand axe. And that's the most important thing, is doubling with a hand axe or javelin. That's what you need to get a good offense in FE7. And Dorcas cannot do that because he just doesn't have any speed. Now, if there were speed wings in the early game of FE7, or like in FE7 at all, you could maybe remedy it a little bit, because that could get him in threshold. But even with like 2 speed wings, theoretically, I think he still only has like 10 speed, and that's, I mean, it's Hawkeye's 11 speed and Marcus's 11 speed are sort of like on the borderline doubling threshold for the mid game, and Dorcas barely reaches that with 2 speed wings. But here's the thing, you just don't have 2 speed wings in Hector mode. In the other difficulties, you can steal a speed wing from Zoldam, but on hard mode he doesn't have it anymore. You have to steal his guiding ring instead. There's just no speed wing available until, I think the first one is in Pale Flower of Darkness, Kenneth or Jeremy, I think in both. And then the next one I think is in the Sonya chapter. So that's very, very late into the game. That means that speed is very hard to fix with stat boosters, even if you wanted to give him to. And of course, there's also other units that would appreciate having speed wings, but Dorcas is probably the primary recipient of them. But FE7 is just very lacking in stat boosters and ways to fix bad stats, so Dorcas is going to be stuck not doubling. His durability is good because his HP is good and his defense is okay. It's alright. One funny thing about that is though, like if you rely on a large HP pool to survive, it means that for most units, someone like Lowen, if he gets hit a couple times, he's used a vulnerary or heal with Sarah once, and he's topped off and he's ready to go again. Dorcas, he gets hit twice, he's at like, I don't know, 5 HP, and then you use a vulnerary, he's at 15, but he's still gonna get 2-hit KO'd most of the time, because having high defense is more effective at taking a lot of hits than having high HP when you take healing into account. So that's kind of tough to get him like topped off all the time. Now, once you get Amends, that's kind of a non-issue anymore, and especially once you get Recover and Elixirs, that's like less of an issue. But this is something I found troublesome when using Dorcas sometimes. I also don't like training Dorcas in FE7 because it makes me go to the Jeremy map instead of the Kenneth map. I'm not gonna like hold that against him, but that is also a very annoying thing that I hate. So fuck that shit. I hate the Jeremy map so much. We're gonna put Dorcas, I think it's like a D tier unit. Wouldn't say he's E tier, he's not like unviable or anything. I think he's better than Mia, for instance. I think he's better than Est. I guess he joins the rest of the memes then. Is Dunvet better? I don't know, man. I don't know about that. Dorcas is around during a time you have like no alternatives to deploy. Early game units, you don't really get that many in FE7, and you only get a deployment screen at like 14, and even then, there's not. You barely have to undeploy anyone. He's not someone I would usually deploy in chapter 15, where you have to ditch like 2 units, like the defense chapter against Sealan and the basically Ostian defense chapter. So, or not Ostian, Laos defense chapter, there we go. So you usually ditch him there, but you can deploy him with not much of a cost because you're going to undeploy like Sarah or something. It's like whatever. Dorcas is okay, I guess, but FE7 standards are pretty high. Then we have Sane, the Limb Mode Cavalier, and God, this guy is pretty goddamn good. I like using Sane a lot. There's like 2 flavors of Sane that I would rate a little differently. Or actually, I would say there's like 3 in a way. One of them is you only play Hector mode, or you only play Eliwood mode, I guess, but I usually take only Hector hard mode into account. He joins as like, I don't know, level 4 Cavalier or something, and he's alright. I would say that version of him is worse than Lowen, for instance, because he joins a little under-leveled, and I think he's a double by the Mercenaries in his joining chapter. Takes a while to get him to double things. I think doubling archers with them for like with the next map is already pretty difficult. And he has a bit of a slow start. He can definitely become good over time. It just takes a little bit of effort. And this class makes it worth it, of course. Like Cavaliers in FEGBA are always good, or at least at least they're usable, I guess. But he does all right. He's not bad enough to where you wouldn't want to use him, but he definitely needs some training. Then there's you play through the limb mode normally, and then you get into like level 10 or so. And then you finish the limb mode, and he comes back at like a reasonably high level. That version of him is pretty good, on par with Lowen. Arguably better, arguably worse. His high strength really shines at that point. He 2-shots almost everything, and if he doubles something, it's pretty much dead. And if you get a bit lucky with the speed procs, he can double early. I don't know how much he needs speed-wise, but his growth is decent enough. I think he's like a 40% growth. So if he gets like a couple points early on and he doubles like an archer in the next chapter in Whereabouts Unknown, that's really going to get him to a good start where he can like really snowball. Depends on how on your luck go, because if you get speed screwed, of course, that's not going to happen. But on average, Sane will double enough in FE7 to get by. And if you double in FE7, you have access to javelins and later hand axes, then you're generally good. The last flavor, and that's I think a really good unit, is early promoted Sane with the limb mode Nightcrest. You get that one from Wallace. You trade it to him. You train him normally up to like you try to prioritize him, feeding him kills in limb mode. Give him to like level 14 or something, level 15 if you can. And then you promote him, and then you have a second Marcus basically, and that's super good. A little bit different build from Marcus. He has a lot worse skill, so his hit with javelins and hand axes is quite a bit worse, and he's not as close to like A rank lances or even S rank lances, so he might not be able to use the silver lance, he might not get the +5 accuracy and critical hit, but his stats other than that will be pretty good. Particularly his strength will be really high, but his weapon ranks are a little bit worse, and his accuracy will be a bit worse, but his speed will on average be a bit better, so that's also good. And you shouldn't feel bad about early promoting Sane or even Kent in that scenario, because it's just so nice to have a powerful Sane like that in the early game of Hector Hard mode. He misses like the early chapters, but after that it's just super nice to have 2 really good paladins, and you can even train Kent up alongside them. The other advantage, of course, is that by promoting him with a limb mode Night Crest, you save a Night Crest from the main campaign that you can use to promote another paladin or Aswin if you want, because Night Crests are kind of rare. You only get like 1 in a reasonable time frame, and that's the one from chapter 17. And after that, you have to wait until like Kinship's Bond, I think, to get the next one. And then if you want another one after that, well, shit, you're kind of out of luck. You kind of need the Earth Seal from the Linus Lloyd chapter, I think, to promote another Night Crest user. So every one of those you can save is welcome. That version of Sane, I would honestly put into like S tier or at least like upper A. The other ones are more like A tier units, I would say. Maybe high B, but generally A tier. So I think overall it's fine to put Sane at around the same point as Lowen, considering all these versions. I have said before, I think Lowen is better than the version of Sane that joins under leveled and like just playing Hector Hard mode, no limb mode. But if you take limb mode into account, I think Sane will always be better. So kind of depends on your perspective, I guess. I think overall these are 2 fairly similar units, even though their stats are a little bit different. Lowen is more tanky. They both have like pretty average to low skill actually. Lowen's skill is better, but generally accuracy and FE7 is not a big problem, especially when you can manipulate the weapon triangle like that. So I think this is about right for Sane. I would put him in like a solid A tier for sure. So Sane was suggested by Inuzama Frost, so thank you again. And then we have Mentos, who suggested Geets. Now Geets is someone that like, if you raid him, it's very apparent whether you take into account recruitment costs or not. I'd say that wouldn't, so I'm not going to take it into account, but I want to have mentioned it. He joins in chapter 24 of Hector Hard mode from the top of my head. I don't know about Elliot mode, and he's pretty good. But the big problem with him is you have to get his map, and to get his map you have to combine your Lord's levels, and if it's higher than 50 or equal to 50, I think it's actually higher than 49 or equal to 50 or higher, then you get this version where you get Geets, and if you don't, you get the Lloyd version, which has Wallace. And a lot of people, most of the time, they will argue that the Geets version is superior because Geets is better than Wallace, which is true, and Linus is easier to beat than Lloyd, which is also true, and then there's no Fog of War on that map. It's generally an easier map, which is also true. But at the same time, I think people forget that using Lyn and Eliwood is pretty annoying, and I think this is also something that's like a big gap between people who play the normal modes and the hard modes of FE7. And I'm not saying this because there's like anything wrong with playing the normal modes, but in Hector Hard mode this is a big difference because Lyn and Eliwood perform substantially worse on Hector Hard mode, and also they gain a lot less XP per hit. So whereas on Eliwood normal mode and Hector normal mode, you gain like tons and tons of XP for killing enemies forever. On hard modes, the XP cut for being overleveled is very harsh in comparison. I find that sometimes you kill like an enemy and you get like 5 XP with an unpromoted unit, and that's very harsh. Maybe not 5, but like 10. But the point is, there's like almost no difference anymore between chipping and killing, and that's very depressing to play sometimes. It's one of the reasons why FE7 can feel so tedious sometimes. It's like your units barely grow sometimes. Also makes the hard mode rank runs really hard. So I don't know where that leaves Geets exactly if you were to take his cost into account, but I generally find you can do it. You can train Hector, Eliwood, and Lyn to a combined level of 50. I think generally the way people do it is they train Hector to level 20 because he's the best of them and the easiest to train. And then Lyn and Eliwood, they both need to be like level 15 on minimum. But I think people just don't realize how high that is on a hard mode run when you're trying to like play reasonably efficiently. They are so bad at combat because they can't promote and they only use swords. So no one to range. Lyn is very fragile. Eliwood is okay at that point, especially if he has Hector support, but he's still not optimal. Like, try using these units in the chapter like Genesis or something. It's like, it's not just that using them is annoying, but also the deployment slots in Hector Hard mode are so annoying. Like, remember what I mentioned about Isadora, how you like, barely have slots for her? Now try justifying undeploying Isadora to use Lyn. Like, fuck that shit. That's the worst. And in an Iron Man setting, for example, where these units give a game over, there's no way. I don't want to touch these units ever, basically. It's super annoying. So that makes training them really annoying to get Geets. So I usually don't bother. I usually just get the Lloyd version, and that means I have to deal with Fog of War. But that map is also easy to low turn. You just like put someone in range of Lloyd to learn towards the fort, kill him in like 2 hits if you can, or like 3. You can use like Sword for Hawkeye plus Marcus, plus like a couple of other support units if you want to. You might miss out on Wallace, but like who cares? Wallace is bad. You miss out on Silent Staff, who cares? I find that generally that is the easier way to go. And sure, you have to deal with a harder boss in this chapter, but you have to face the other one in Conquer Destiny anyway, so I don't think you still have to face both no matter what you do. So I think it's just delaying the inevitable by putting Lloyd later. And later on, Lloyd will be on a throne, which is even more annoying to deal with. So, I don't know. I don't think this is I think these chapters are not a good reason to use Lynn and Elderwood, is basically my point. And for that reason, I haven't recruited Geats in a long time. That said, if you do get Geats, he's pretty fucking good at fighting. He is a warrior that's pre-promoted, and he has like B rank in both bows and axes. Of course, the only axe he really needs is the hand axes to kill everything, because his speed is good enough to double. I think it's 14 at base in Hector hard mode, but even in like normal modes, or like Edward hard mode, he has enough speed to double, despite lack of hard mode bonuses. And his durability is pretty good. He has a high pool of HP, but also a lot of defense to work with, so he can take hits pretty well. His res is a little low, but if that really becomes an issue, you can always pure water him and he's fine for most part. Like, unless he's fighting like Conquer Destiny Valkyries, he's generally going to be okay. And then like the B rank bows is not super useful, but he is like, if you do get him, he's a good use of the Brave Bow, just because it doesn't get weighed down as much, and he can kill some pretty strong targets with it. I think he'd actually make a decent boss killer with it. I haven't tried it out, but I feel like that would be pretty decent. And just general, like, he's a pretty high speed axe user. He's like 14 speed is pretty good in comparison. It's just doubling with axes is like a formula for success in FE7. So not taking his recruitment cost into account, I would say you have almost no reason not to put him like somewhere around here where Hawkeye is, because they're very similar in that regard. Hawkeye has higher crit and more durability, but Geats is easier to ferry around, has the bow option, and it's a little more speed for more reliable doubling. There are enemies that Hawkeye doesn't double, definitely. Speed gap is significant. They're like right around that range where they're like sometimes doubling, sometimes not doubling. So yeah, I would say they're about equal. I will rate Hawkeye a little higher because he joins a little earlier. That's the main reason I'm rating him higher. His availability in the desert and in Genesis is pretty nice, and the doubling problem is not that huge, but it is there, and I think you could make a good case for either way. But again, this does not take into account the recruitment cost, because I said I wouldn't do that. If you take it into account, Geats like falls way down. If you play like a draft run, for example, where you're picking units, Geats is not a good pick, because just in order to get him, you have to use a bunch of bad units, and that sucks. Don't do it unless you're going for him, of course. If you like using Lynn and Elderwood, if you're up for the challenge and you also want to use Geats, you're not like screwed exactly. But I remember, for example, for the speedrun drafts that we did, Geats was very bad pick, like basically the last pick. So yeah. Alright, next up is the FE8 squad. We have Garrick, Vanessa, Joshua, Amelia, and Naomi. Garrick was suggested by Jean, so thank you very much. And I think almost everyone knows how good Garrick is when he joins. I think he's like the best ambassador for early promotion, because they put him at exactly level 10 with her hero crest in his inventory. Like, they were basically saying, try it out, just promote him, just try it out. And I think a lot of people do it. I think a lot of people make an exception for Garrick when it comes to early promotion. And they also gave him only like a 30% speed growth, as if they were trying to say like, he's not going to grow that much speed anymore, and his base is already pretty good. Just promote this guy. And I love that. I think that's a great move. They did a similar thing with Cormac, like level 9 with Illusion Whip, but I think for Garrick it's even more effective. And it also doesn't hurt that Garrick has a very interesting promotion. I think Garrick's split promotion is one of the most interesting one in the series. Most of the time in FE8 there's like one superior option overall. Like, I think Paladin is superior to Great Knight. That one's like a little controversial. A lot of people still like Great Knight, but I think Paladin is much better. I think Paladin is much better than General for Amelia too. I think Summoner is the best one for like Null and Ewan. I think Ross is best off going Berserker and then Hero by far compared to Warrior. What else is there? You got like Sniper versus Bow Knight for Naomi, or Ranger I guess it's called. Big blowout for Ranger for obvious reasons. So Garrick has to choose between a Mounts and lower Constitution, which is good for rescuing, or one to range with hand axes, and that's a pretty difficult dilemma. I usually go Hero with him because I think the hand axes are more important, and he only gets one less move to Hero compared to Ranger, because for some reason Paladins get to have 8 move in FE8, but every other mounted class is like 7, even promoted. So it's like, why? Game, please, just give me more move. But the game's like, no, you get 7 move, that's it. That does mean that Garrick becomes like so heavy that it's kind of hard to carry around. I think a promoted Paladins like Ford or Kyle or Franz cannot rescue him anymore as a hero. He's a little bit hard to get around, but if he can get to enemies, he will generally kill them. He's really good stats, really good in 0% growth runs, like negative growths, just because of how good the stats are. He can reasonably get to Garm if you're willing to use the Devil Axe a bit, or just really focus hard on axes, but using swords with him is just fine as well. His strength is good, his bulk is good, the one to range that he has, if he has it, is good. His res is whatever, not a big issue, not a big enough issue to like really worry about. His availability is a little sketch, especially on the FRM route, like joining chapter 13 is not great. I didn't get a whole lot out of him in my FE8 100% growth LTC for that reason, because I was FRM route. But he's still useful in his joining chapter and a couple chapters after that, so I wouldn't count him out entirely. And of course, that was a 100% growth run, so I didn't need Garrick's stats as much as like a run with like normal growth would. So that is also a factor. Erica route, he joins chapter 10, which is a lot better. So I would say Erica route Garrick is like an A, maybe B, but I think like an A tier is like solid for Erica route. For Ephraim route, I would definitely put him in B tier. It's still good when he joins. He's like I don't know, maybe not Pent level, but like Hawkeye level, almost in Ephraim route. So if we're going that way, then I guess he's like around here somewhere. Better than Lex, I don't know. Better than Hawk. I guess if I put it like that, I have to put him above Hawkeye and Geets, right? I guess I have to. I think he's pretty good. He's pretty solid. It's pretty nice. I feel like he should be lower, but I'm not exactly sure why, because I feel like that is like, if I want to remain consistent, I think this is kind of the way I have to rate him. But I'm open to having my mind change. He seems like a lot higher than Dusel for one. But then again, Dusel is like very much worse than Erica route, and even on Ephraim route I wasn't like terribly impressed. So we'll keep him here for now. Looks a little weird though. Next is Vanessa by Jesus Kun 69, of course, and I like Vanessa a lot. I think he's one of the best units in FE8 by far. Earliest flyer that joins with blinding speed, like reaches 20 speed almost every time for me, and I think that's what she does on average too, so not just personal experience there. She does have some weaknesses, or it's like her strength, defense obviously kind of low, HP is kind of low, but I find that generally she becomes so dodgy it almost doesn't even matter. It helps that she's so flexible on where she goes and where she attacks from, that it's easy to avoid archers and still be very useful. So even though parts of the map are kind of like barred from her going there because of the high enemy density of like enemies that can kill her, there is almost always something for her to do. And I love promoting her with the chapter 8 Elysian Whip and just have a really good Wyvern Knight. I think that is also like a super good promotion compared to Falcon Knight. I think there's almost no reason to go that way. Wyvern Knight has higher con, so you lose less speed from lances. Most crucial for using javelins to steal double stuff and double mercenaries with like an iron lance or something. Falcon Knight, the only advantage to that is like you can use swords, which are like whatever. If you want to get an advantage on a pirate or something, you can use an axe weaver, like if that's like really important to you. And then you get more rescue utility because you get less con, so more aid. But I think you'd rather have high con for better weapons, I think. So yeah, you also get Pierce as a Wyvern Knight, which late game becomes like a good option for boss kills if you're willing to RNG abuse or just willing to get lucky. Both of those are fun. Vanessa, I noticed in my draft speed run that Vanessa isn't actually that efficient compared to, say, using Franz in the early game. Like if you have to use one of Franz and Vanessa, which is really the dilemma we were in for, if you have to use only one of them, and then I find that Franz is generally faster in the early game if you're like basically soloing the game with them early on. And then what was the other problem? Oh yeah, you can just get like Tana or Cormac in the mid game, train them up instead, and then you end up with a lower time. This is in a speedrun context, not even LTC, but speedrun. But just something I noticed, and I had like a bit of a discussion with someone on subreddit a while ago about like how good Vanessa actually is, and how maybe she's like worse than Franz for the, like similar reasons that Franz is performed better combat-wise in the early game. I think he doubles around the same amount of enemies when you take into account speed loss, and he has weapon triangle with swords, which is a big deal against all those brigands. Generally, it's better, like it's generally more efficient to just use Franz and Seth for everything in the early game, and just kind of leave Vanessa alone and then train Tana or Cormac instead in the mid game when you can, than it is to slow down the early game and train Vanessa. I think there's something to that, but I think for most casual players, I would still say Vanessa is like a super good unit. I would say she's like the top of A tier or like low S tier is what I'm thinking right now. I think before I might have put her like in the S tier easily, but right now what I'm thinking is maybe A tier. Her fire utility is really nice in FE8 though, especially in the last few chapters. Flyers are so good to have, and just because there are other flyers doesn't mean Vanessa's utility as a flyer is diminished a lot. Like it's unbelievable. Like even Seth in the late game, stat wise, it still holds up. But try using Seth in chapter 20 of FE8 and you'll just get a headache. Like if you're trying to get Seth to carry Erica to the throne in that chapter, you're just like completely fucked. It's gonna be so slow with all the force and terrain in the way. Vanessa just flies over it and kills everything. It's so much better. So maybe here, should she, like, the question is, like, for example, Katria from Shadows of Valencia, right, is also a peg you gotta invest in. She joins like halfway through the game. Or well, I mean, the axe system makes it a little bit weird, but I feel like she couldn't be worse than Katria, right? Or like at least not like a tier below Katria. So maybe like here is fine above Jake. Does that seem fair to you guys? I don't know, we'll see. Maybe better than Jill actually, because Jill does have like a lot less availability. Still worse than Marcia, who I do think is easier to train overall, thanks to bonus experience. Worse than Katja, who I think is a better start combat wise. I think this is about fair for her. I would still say she's S tier overall. And we can still put Franz higher, you know, we still have that shot. Although Franz feels like a worse unit to me than a lot of these S tier units. So maybe Franz should be like more here around. We'll see. We'll see. Next up is Joshua, suggested by the Kiras. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm sorry. I always say I'm going to butcher it and then promise myself to study the pronunciation of usernames, and it never really ends up working out. But here you go. Here's Joshua. And, well, Joshua's fast. I think that's the main conclusion we can get from this. Joshua's fast. That was just about everything. Even if he weighs himself down a bit, he can still do something like weigh himself down with an armor slayer, kill an armor knight. So that speed gives him a lot of options. But he can double mercenaries, he can double fighters in the early game, just one round them with a steel sword. His early game combat is pretty good. Of course, what Joshua lacks is 1-2 range and a mount later on. That kind of makes him like not that good in the long term. But for early game, I like his combat a lot. Of course, people will say FE8 is easy. It doesn't really matter who you use, so why would you need that combat? But then everyone loves Joshua anyway because he has a hat, and apparently that like automatically makes you cool or something. I don't know. Lack of 1-2 range is a big deal in FE8, where the enemy quality is so low that you could just solo it with Seth or Franz or something, or Vanessa, and just murder everything. Whereas Joshua, no matter how good the stats might be, he's not going to kill everything on an enemy phase. Most enemies only have 1 range, but a good, like, I would say 30 to 40% still have 2 range or 1-2 range. FE8 has a lot of archers and mages just sprinkled in a lot of groups, and some javelins as well. And even if you have Joshua use like a Lance Reaver, it's still like super inefficient to use him against those enemies. So generally not the best option for those, but if there's like a fast enemy you want it to be like taken care of, it's pretty good. Swordmaster, by far the best option for Joshua compared to Assassin. Assassin doesn't really have anything that helps him a lot. Generally, Joshua, if his strength is too low to 1 round, what he needs is a critical hit. And whether that's a normal critical hit from a Swordmaster or an Assassinate crit from the like a Silencer from the Assassin, doesn't really matter as long as he gets the crit. So you'd much rather increase the chance of critting with the 50% increase from the Swordmaster than anything else. So that makes Swordmaster better. I think the promo bonus are also a little better. I think it gets speed from Swordmaster whereas he doesn't from Assassin. At least that's the case in FE7. So that kind of sucks. It gets lockpick utility from Assassin, but why would you need that in a game where you can buy chest keys or use Colm or Vanak instead? I pulled Joshua away from combat to open doors. That seems kind of silly. So I think generally you want to go Swordmaster with Joshua. And it's a pretty good class for him, considering what his strength is, which is just killing individual targets with a killing edge. You don't have much need for this in FE8, but it is something he does pretty well. I would say he's like a fairly solid C tier unit. I would rate him like around here somewhere, I think. Yeah, this seems about right for him. I think he's better than Brighton overall. And it looks like we're adding another line to the tier list, so it's time to get back to scrolling again. I think Joshua's nice. Maybe he should be better than Loot. He does run circles around Loot when they both are around in the early game. But Loot in the long term has much better payoff, because if Loot becomes competent, she just one-rounds everything at 1-2 range. It just takes a lot of work. But at least it gets somewhere. Whereas Joshua never really has a solid mid to late game because of the lack of 1-2 range. So I think Loot overall is better. But in the early game, Joshua definitely has her beat for a little bit. So it's close. It's close. And then, of course, we have Amelia, suggested by Moo. I don't know why. I don't know why you keep giving me these units, but here is Amelia. And I've said a lot about Amelia in the past. Not nice things most of the time, and they still hold true to this day for the most part. I like using Amelia, actually. I think she's really fun to use. I used her in my Iron Man. I trained her to promotion in her joining chapter because I was playing I used a randomizer to make sure that the enemy growths were increased because I wanted to flex. I wanted to increase the growth by 31%. And to do that, I used a randomizer, and that randomizer for some reason it breaks trainee promotions and it forces them to use a trainee seal even if you don't change them at all. So Amelia joins with a trainee seal and she can use it to promote in her chapter itself, and then I used that to train her to Cavalier in her joining chapter. And for some reason in that playthrough, my Franz, my Kyle, and my Ford all got RNG screwed in strength and speed as well. Basically, they were terrible in that playthrough. They were horrible. Ford eventually turned around, but the others I just kind of benched, and they were so terrible. Amelia got strength almost every single level up. I made the round myself. I know I didn't increase her growth, but she got strength almost every level up. It was so stupid. She capped strength at like level 4 Paladin or something. I made a straw poll in the chat asking what promotion I should pick. I just gave him the option like Paladin in general, Great Knight, or like I actually think I just made a straw poll. It was like, alright, do a straw poll for the promotion or just pick myself, and everyone just voted pick myself. So I just made her a Paladin, you know, just to prove a point. And she was one of my best units. She was super solid, kind of frail actually, but strength-wise super good. Of course, I had to slow way the fuck down to train her, and that's what makes her so bad. You have to put a lot of effort in, and what you get out of it isn't that much better by Seth and Franz and Kyle that it warrants it. It does end up a little better than these on average, mostly on account of like her super high luck. But her other stats aren't that much better, and they're usually even worse. Her average is definitely worse than Seth when they're both trained, and she joins, like, if you compare her level to Seth, he is like the equivalent of like a 30 level lead on her from the start, and that's not even taking into account any levels that he gets between chapters 1 and Amelia's joining chapter. That's such a huge level lead, and then comparing them with like their equal level averages is just hilarious to me. I love it when people use that argument. Amelia is very, 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 very bad if you have consistent standards for tiering, and if you don't just bend the rules around making her good. If you have any kind of standards, Amelia is bad. But Sacred Stones is very kind to bad units if you're willing to make them good through grinding the tower or anything like that. So she's no way unviable, but just a very, very bad unit when you have standards. Basically, you don't have standards. Amelia's pretty good though. That sounds very weird. Better than Lyre, I think so. I think a little bit better than Ire, but I think she's actually worse than Arden, for instance. I do think so. And again, this takes you into account no grinding, and you don't want to slow down the train units. The faster a unit becomes competent, the better. And with those standards, Amelia is very, very bad in general. Last unit for today is Naomi, submitted by Skylar. Thank you so much for everything, Skylar. And I think Skylar also mentioned that he really enjoys using Naomi. She can be fun to use, I guess, but her stats are so bad. Stats are so bad. It's almost like a carbon copy of Rebecca from FE7. In a game where having an enemy phase is so important. If this was FE6, if this was like Volt, maybe I'd rate her a little bit higher, but Naomi is just so bad at base. I think her growths are good. It's like a slightly better version of Rebecca in that regard. Like I think it's a 45 string growth or something. And one fun thing you can do with Naomi is make use of her very fast comb support. They have like an instant C, and then they grow pretty fast from there still. It's like Fire Light, I think. So that's full attack, full hit, full crit. So they both become pretty offensively competent. They both have their issues as units, of course. Like they both lack a good enemy phase. Comb is kind of fragile, and then maybe he's like just can't counter an enemy phase unless like an enemy archer. So that sucks. But boy, the crit is pretty fun, and the attack is pretty fun. It's fun to use in that regard for sure. But it takes a little bit of time and training to get him there. Once she's that good though, hey, have fun, go nuts. The split promotion for Naomi, I've said it before, it's super baffling to me. Why would you make the player choose between a mount with 7 move and the option to use swords? It's like these swords, but still, it's swords. It's 1 range, something that they've wanted for ages. Pretty good options, really damn good. Or you can have 6 move and no mounts, no swords, but you get sure shot, which I think level % of the time makes them hit all the time. And this is a game where I think Amelia, if Naomi is already trained to promotion, she's already gonna have like 100 hit on like just about everything. So you add a very unreliable bit of unreliability in exchange for all that stuff I just mentioned about the ranger. It's so baffling to me that there are people who defend Sniper Naomi, and it just baffles me. The stats are not that much better. They're like slightly better probably. I haven't even looked at it because no 1 or 2 point stat difference is gonna make up for that huge loss. It's so baffling to me how imbalanced the promotions of FE8 can be. It's nice that you can get a mount, get rescue utility. Rangers are fun to use. The longbow, just having like being able to attack from like I think like 11 squares away is pretty fun. 11 is more than 1, so that's pretty cool. I would say Naomi, I think she's better than Amelia for sure, better than all these units in F tier, but I still think she's like F or E tier, just on account of like how useless an Archer is in comparison to like other units in FE8. I'm sorry guys, I'm sorry to end it on an F tier note, but someone has to be the worst, so I think I would rate Amelia or Naomi around this level. There's not a whole lot she can do in the early game, and once you get limited deployment slots, you generally don't want to deploy her. Maybe with like a Ballista on the field or something. Yeah, and that's the list for today. That's what we've got. So I tiered about 30 units. We have about 30 more to go from the submission round. So I'm going to do those next. That will probably be out next week. I tried to post these on Monday. That will probably work this week. So expect that one either next week or the week after. Depends on when I'm doing an archetype or another big tier list. We'll see. Either way, let me know if you have any disagreements. I'm willing to move people around. Of course, these videos get very, very long. So I might not have time to address everything in depth. I do read the comment section, so let me know if you got any suggestions. And again, if you want to join me and support me, you can check out my Patreon link in the description. If you don't, you just want to watch these, that is fine too. I welcome all the support, but only do it if you can afford it and if you want to. Thanks for everything to all my Patreons and to everyone who watched, and we'll see you next time. Peace and goodbye.